Chapter 1717. Comprehending the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. Looking at the tribesmen who were unafraid of death, Zhuowen even saw some old, weak, women and children among them. They also stood out. In their hearts, the tribe was their home, their faith. Although they feared the illusion god like a tiger before, in order to protect their home, every single one of them was willing to risk their lives. Even if they were old, weak, women and children, between their home and their lives, they unhesitatingly chose the former. The instant everyone in the tribe stood out, the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs in Zhuowen's body seemed to have received some sort of resonance. Instantly, the 8 Yellow Springs death needles collapsed, turning into more than 80,000 Yellow Springs water droplets. Each droplet of Yellow Springs water droplets emitted a strange sound. Not only Zhuowen, but the Yellow Springs water droplets in the Qin tribe also flew out, resonating with the Yellow Springs water droplets in Zhuowen's body. The resonating sound became louder and louder, as if thunder had descended from the 9 heavens, exploding in a radius of several tens of thousands of miles around the Qin tribe. Zhuowen also didn't expect such a change. Soon after, the Yellow Springs water droplets flew out of the Qin tribe's bodies and gathered in the air, completely merging with the 80,000 Yellow Springs water droplets released by Zhuowen. Crash! In an instant, the numerous Yellow Springs water droplets formed a stream, forming an enormous Yellow Springs river that spanned 10 miles. Although the Yellow Springs formed by Zhuowen was much smaller than the Yellow Springs formed by Taoist Songlong's slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with excitement. At this moment he suddenly understood that the true cultivation method of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs was not for an individual, but for an entire group. There was a limit to a person's strength. No matter how many Yellow Springs water droplets a person killed, how many Yellow Springs water droplets could they accumulate? Back then, he had seen Taoist Songlong use the Yellow Spring finger of massacre. That Yellow Spring could reach the 9 heavens and the 9 underworlds. The Yellow Spring was so big that even Zhuowen felt his heart palpitate. Although Zhuowen was quite confident in himself, he still felt that it would be difficult for him to gather so many Yellow Springs water droplets with his strength alone. But now, when he saw the Yellow Springs water droplets surging out of the Qin tribe's bodies and forming 10 miles of Yellow Springs, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of understanding. So the method of gathering Yellow Springs water droplets did not rely on an individual, but a group. At this moment, Zhuowen thought of many things. He thought of the 3 worlds that existed in the Azure Dragon Hall. Apart from the 3rd world, the 1st world and the 2nd world both contain small worlds with many living beings inside. Perhaps before the Songlong Taoist went missing, his Yellow Springs water droplets were most likely collected from the countless living beings in the 1st and 2nd heaven. This was also the reason why the Songlong Taoist set up a small world in the Songlong Hall, and why there were so many living beings in the small world. Moreover, Zhuowen boldly guessed that in the battle back then, Taoist Songlong might have used all his skills and absorbed all the Yellow Springs water droplets from the bodies of all the living beings in the 2 heavens and earth. Therefore, the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs did not exist in the 2 heavens and earth. It seems that Taoist Songlong is indeed a person of great wisdom. The 2 heavens and earth are the best places to cultivate the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice, his eyes bursting with an unprecedented radiance. At this moment, the middle-aged man and the black-robed woman had already led thousands of illusion gods to a few hundred meters away from the Qin tribe. The profound practitioners were killed by you, right? The middle-aged man stared at Zhuowen, who was floating in the air, with a murderous aura. However, after seeing the 10 miles of Yellow Springs surrounding Zhuowen, the middle-aged man's eyes revealed a rare trace of fear. He could feel that the 10 miles of Yellow Springs contained an extremely large amount of energy, and this energy caused his mind to tremble slightly. Yes, it was me who killed them. Zhuowen floated above the Yellow Springs, his long hair and robes fluttering without any wind. His eyes were filled with fanaticism as he laughed and said, I finally know how to cultivate the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. Today, I'll let you illusion gods see the true power of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. As he spoke, Zhuowen pointed out with his finger. Immediately, the Yellow Springs around him suddenly boiled, and then condensed into a several hundred-meter-long finger above Zhuowen. The lines on the surface of this finger were clear, as if it was a real human finger. Countless yellow vortexes appeared on the surface of the finger. If one looked carefully, these vortexes were actually constantly rotating yellow circles of reincarnation, and contained the reincarnation of life and death. Slaughtering finger of yellow springs. Zhuowen took a step forward and escaped into the void. When he reappeared, he was already above the countless illusion gods. The void around the huge finger collapsed inch by inch, and it was swept back into the void. As Zhuowen's finger fell, the space within a few thousand feet around the thousands of illusionary gods collapsed. A huge black hole slowly emerged from the void, and the finger that contained the cycle of life and death suddenly fell from the black hole. It was like a vast mountain that smashed down. Bang, bang, bang. As the finger fell, continuous explosive sounds erupted. Soon after, the thousands of illusion gods exploded into a bloody mist under the bombardment of the finger. The bloody mist was absorbed by the finger, and the power of the finger rose to a higher level. What kind of move is this? How can it be so terrifying? The black-robed woman and the middle-aged man snorted and had no choice but to retreat a few thousand steps. Seeing the thousands of illusion gods that they had brought being blasted into dregs by the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs, the two of them were both shocked and furious. Rumble. In an instant, thousands of illusion gods were annihilated, and countless sins were absorbed by the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. The finger began to grow, and finally evolved to thousands of meters in size. Zhuowen took a step forward and landed on the tip of the finger. His gaze was indifferent as he stared at the black-robed woman and the middle-aged man, who were constantly retreating. He was like a supreme and majestic emperor looking down at the two of them. Die! Zhuowen stomped his foot, and the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs was like a giant ancient beast that swept towards the middle-aged man and the black-robed woman. Wherever the finger passed, the space collapsed, and countless gusts of wind swept out. The middle-aged man and the black-robed woman's gazes were gloomy. The two of them looked at each other and revealed a resolute expression. "Help me." The middle-aged man coldly stared at the black-robed woman. The latter bit the tip of her tongue and waved her jade-like hand. Instantly, countless black mist swept out from her body, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Immediately, the black mist squirmed and drilled into the middle-aged man's 7 apertures, and his aura skyrocketed. Intruders must die. The middle-aged man's gaze was cold. He grabbed at the void with his right hand, and immediately, countless black mist condensed into a large saber. He stepped on the air and arrived in front of the finger in an instant. Then he held the large saber in his hand and slashed out. Bang! A terrifyingly huge saber-chi swept through the air and heavily slammed into the finger. Instantly, a terrifying explosion erupted. Immediately, the middle-aged man's pupils shrank as he realized that the terrifying saber-chi had blasted on the finger, and a terrifying energy ripple erupted. The surrounding space shattered, and the middle-aged man let out a muffled groan and retreated continuously. Zhuowen's gaze grew colder. His right foot hit on the finger, and suddenly, the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs erupted with a terrifying power, overpowering the middle-aged man's saber-chi. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He held the large saber in his right hand horizontally in front of him, and the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs happened to be in front of the saber. The middle-aged man retreated again, and again, until he was tens of thousands of meters away. Immediately, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Die. Zhuowen's gaze was surging with killing intent. He slapped his right hand, and the vortex on the surface of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs produced a terrifying tearing force. The tearing force was too terrifying. The middle-aged man let out a blood-curdling scream as he was torn to pieces by the tearing force. He exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Then, the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs absorbed the sins, causing the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs to become even larger. The black-robed woman's face was pale. At this moment, Zhuowen was much stronger than before. In other words, Zhuowen's slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs was much more terrifying than a year ago. Without hesitation, the black-robed woman fled towards the ancestral land. She did not dare to confront Zhuowen head-on. Zhuowen stared at the fleeing black-robed woman, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a cold smile. He flew across the sky with the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs and followed closely behind the black-robed woman. The people of the Qin Tian tribe stared blankly at this scene. They did not expect that the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs that they unleashed together would be so powerful. My lord is probably planning to borrow the power of the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs to rush into the ancestral land, Miao Yi said with a complicated gaze. He knew very well that Zhuowen did not belong here. If Zhuowen really succeeded in breaking into the ancestral land, then it would be difficult for him to see Zhuowen again in the future. The black-robed woman quickly arrived at the black hole in the depths of the mountain. She glanced at Zhuowen and the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs under his feet. Her beautiful eyes were filled with determination. She formed a seal with her jade-like hand and said in a deep voice, "Stop this person." As soon as she said that, countless illusory gods surged out from the black fog in the black hole. Then, these illusory gods exploded into black flames that soared into the sky. The black flames were too large. They soared into the sky and gathered into a huge black flame dragon. The black dragon leaped up, roared at the sky, and rushed towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked at the black flame dragon that was rushing towards him. He sneered and said, "The same move is no longer effective against me." When Zhuowen entered the 9th level of the black hole, he was forced to retreat by the black-robed woman's black flames. But now the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs was no longer the same as before. How could it be afraid of the black flame dragon? The slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs pointed out and landed on the black flame dragon. Immediately, the black flame dragon let out a mournful cry and collapsed into countless fragments. The sins within were all absorbed by the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs. The black-robed woman's eyes were filled with horror. Without thinking, she rushed into the black hole. The current Zhuowen was too terrifying. She could not muster up any courage to fight against him. Whoosh! Zhuowen stepped on the slaughtering finger of Yellow Springs and drilled into the black hole without hesitation. Chapter 17-18. Immortal Corpse. The black-robed woman's beautiful eyes were filled with bitterness. At this moment, the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger under Zhuowen's feet was simply a killing machine. Wherever it passed, no matter how many illusion gods there were, they couldn't stop it and collapsed one by one. At this moment, the black-robed woman didn't dare to look back. She was worried that if she looked back, the indifferent man behind her would catch up to her. At that time, she might really die. Bang! 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 The slaughtering Yellow Springs finger was extremely fast. It was like a long rainbow as it constantly advanced into the depths of the black hole. It started from the 1st layer all the way to the 9th layer. Wherever it passed, the illusion gods couldn't stop it. The black-robed woman quickly arrived in front of the white stone door in the depths of the 9th layer. Standing before the door, her beautiful eyes were filled with determination. She formed a seal with both hands. Immediately, all the illusion gods on the 9th layer let out sorrowful cries and exploded into clusters of terrifying black flames one after another. The black flames overflowed and began to converge. In the end, it turned into a sea of black flames that filled the sky. With a crash, it rushed toward Zhuowen, who had just entered the 9th layer. After doing all this, the black-robed woman turned around. Her jade-like hand repeatedly tapped on the white stone door. Soon after, a white circular protrusion in the center of the white stone door caved in, revealing an undetectable crack. The black-robed woman's entire body began to collapse into a cloud of black mist. Soon after, she followed the crack and disappeared in front of the white stone door. When the black mist that the black-robed woman had transformed into disappeared into the crack began to close. A circular protrusion once again appeared in the center of the white stone door. The instant the black-robed woman disappeared into the white stone door, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. His eyes revealed a trace of imperceptible light. At the same time, the sea of black flames that blotted out the sky and covered the earth approached. Zhuowen squatted on the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger and pressed his right hand against the surface of his finger. Soon after, drops of Yellow Springs water floated up and formed a yellow light barrier in front of Zhuowen. After doing all this, Zhuowen's eyes turned cold. With a thought, Not only did the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger under his feet not decrease in speed, it increased its speed. The slaughtering Yellow Springs finger instantly plunged into the sea of black flames. Instantly, an even more terrifying yellow vortex appeared on the surface. An enormous suction force Yellow Springs finger sucked the surrounding Yellow Springs finger, studio, and reincarnation. Although the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger was the black Yellow Springs finger's enormous suction force studio, the sea of black flames was constantly weakened Yellow Springs finger studio. This stalemate only lasted for half an incense stick's worth of time before the boundless sea of black flames completely collapsed. The slaughtering Yellow Spring finger shot out like a shuttle, shuttling through the void as it instantly blasted towards the white stone door. Jiang Studio is Lu Studio Yellow Yen Realm Black Devil Devils. Devil was Devil Studio Devils, it Devil Devil's Top 10 Forbidden Lands, 5 Absolute Cold Lands. As soon as he said that, the void below Zhuowen split open, and a gigantic icy blue demonic hand reached out and blocked the tail of the slaughtering finger of the netherworld. Then it swung violently. Whoosh! The speed of the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger increased explosively once again. Wherever it passed, countless gusts of wind swept up and assaulted Zhuowen's face. It even gave Zhuowen a feeling of space-time illusion. At that moment, the speed of the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger had almost reached the point where it could shatter space itself. Everywhere it passed, the surrounding space would shatter. Rumble! In less than a breath of time, the slaughtering Yellow Springs finger heavily smashed into the white stone door in front of him, and immediately after, a thunderous roar erupted. The rumbling sounds were continuous and endless, ringing in Zhuowen's ears. It was as if thousands of bombs had exploded at the same time. Then, a terrifying ring-shaped storm rose around the massacre finger of hell and the white stone door. The white stone door trembled violently, and a crack even appeared on its surface. However, it did not collapse because of that. Zhuowen's gaze was as cold as a knife. He pointed his right hand at the demonic eye between his eyebrows and shouted in a low voice, "Devil's Top 10 Forbidden Lands, 6 Absolute Tombstones." Boom, boom, boom. An extremely black light suddenly shot out from the demonic eye and blasted into the void below Zhuowen. Immediately after, a huge area of the void collapsed, and terrifying tombstones burst out from within. There were too many tombstones, as if they could bury anyone. Following closely behind the tombstones was a gigantic demonic purple hand. When the gigantic purple hand stretched out, the tombstones that burst out were like a storm that constantly revolved around the gigantic purple hand. Whoosh! The gigantic purple hand was extremely fast, and in an instant, it blocked the tail of the slaughtering finger of hell. Suddenly, the slaughtering finger of hell exploded with a terrifying force. This force was too terrifying, and the cracks on the white stone door's surface rapidly increased. In an instant, the entire white stone door was densely covered in cracks. Break! Zhuowen spat out this word indifferently. Suddenly, the tombstones behind him began to collapse. The demonic hand that stretched out from the tombstones had blue veins popping out, and its strength was raised to the extreme. Boom! Suddenly, the white stone door collapsed, and Zhuowen stepped on the slaughtering finger of hell and directly smashed the door, entering inside. Smoke and dust filled the air. Zhuowen's gaze was extremely vigilant, and his entire body was on guard. However, when he broke the door open, he found that behind the white stone door was terrifyingly quiet. As the smoke and dust slowly dissipated, Zhuowen looked around and revealed a shocked expression. This place was a rather large stone room, and above the stone room were extremely neat rows of iron pillars. These iron pillars extended from one end of the stone room to the other, and iron rings hung on the iron pillars. Below the iron rings was an iron chain, and at the end of the iron chain was a crescent-shaped barb. On the barb was a withered corpse. The barb was pierced through the corpse's neck and came out from the back of the head. This scene was like a dead pig hanging on a barb in a slaughterhouse. However, what was hanging on the barb was not a dead pig, but a human corpse. Moreover, there was not only one corpse hanging in the stone room, but many of them. Zhuowen looked over, and there were no less than a few hundred of them. What shocked Zhuowen even more was that these corpses faintly revealed an aura that made him feel threatened. Moreover, this aura was not unfamiliar to Zhuowen, because he had felt it on the primordial spirits of Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei. That's right, these corpses actually have the aura of a primordial spirit. Could these all be immortal corpses? Thinking of this conjecture, Zhuowen's body trembled, and his eyes revealed a look of disbelief. There were no less than a few hundred corpses in this stone room. Could all of them be immortal corpses? Isn't this too terrifying? Even if all the celestial saints in the entire central plains were added together, there probably wouldn't be so many of them, right? But there were hundreds of immortal corpses here. What exactly was going on? Xiao He turned into a black light and floated in front of Zhuowen, staring solemnly at the hundreds of immortal corpses hanging in the stone room like livestock. These are all ancient martial artists. I didn't expect them to die here. Moreover, it seems that they were tortured to death. Xiao He sighed softly and slowly swept over to the nearest immortal corpse. Its little claws reached into the immortal corpse's abdomen, and a look of surprise immediately appeared in its eyes. Zhuowen naturally noticed the strange look on Xiao He's face and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" Xiao He was silent for a moment and didn't answer Zhuowen's question. Instead, it swept over to another immortal corpse, and its little claws also reached into the immortal corpse's abdomen. The surprise in its eyes became more and more intense. After searching several immortal corpses, Xiao He suddenly looked at Zhuowen and sighed softly. "You'll know when you check the dantian of these immortal corpses. I'm afraid this place isn't a good place." Zhuowen wore a look of surprise and came before an immortal corpse. His right hand reached into the immortal corpse's abdomen, and then his eyes suddenly revealed a serious look. He took a few steps back and frowned. The primordial spirits of these immortal corpses still exist? However, they're almost all shriveled up, as if they'll disappear at any time. Yes, the primordial spirits of these immortal corpses still exist. Generally speaking, the primordial spirits of immortal saints can be completely unsheathed, and they can also use secret techniques to escape. However, the primordial spirits of these immortal corpses are all present in the dantian, and no one has used their primordial spirits to escape. Speaking up to here, Xiao He took a deep breath and said, "I'm afraid these immortal saints didn't die back then. They're just hanging here, and the primordial spirits in their dantian are imprisoned, unable to leave. The reason why they did this is probably to absorb the energy of the primordial spirits of these immortal saints. However, I don't know who this energy is for." Zhuowen's eyes also revealed a serious look. This place was really strange, and it gave him a gloomy feeling. Although these immortal saints hanging in the stone room were all dead, he always felt like he was being spied on. "Kid, these immortal corpses are a great opportunity for you." Xiao He flew to Zhuowen's shoulder and revealed a look of excitement. However, Zhuowen was puzzled and asked, "What do you mean?" "The primordial spirits of these immortal corpses still exist. Although most of their energy has been absorbed and they're shriveled up, primordial spirits are still primordial spirits after all. If you extract all the primordial spirits of these immortal corpses and use the devouring curse forbidden technique to create a primordial spirit bomb, the power of the bomb would be great, right?" Xiao He said. Zhuowen was stunned, and then revealed a look of ecstasy. He said in a low voice, "Why didn't I think of it? The primordial spirits of these immortal corpses have been trapped in their dantian for nearly 10,000 years. The imprisonment technique inside has long been broken. If I didn't cultivate the devouring curse forbidden technique, I might not be able to do anything. However, I have the devouring curse forbidden technique, so this is not a problem for me. However, if I extract the primordial spirits of these immortal corpses without permission, will I be discovered by the master of this place?" Chapter 1719. Luo Yin Zhuowen's eyes flickered. Although he was a little afraid, he did not plan to let these primordial spirits go. After all, if these primordial spirits were to create primordial spirit bombs, they would not be much weaker than Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei's primordial spirits. However, before that, I need to check this stone room thoroughly, just in case. As he spoke, Zhuowen slowly walked into the depths of the stone room. There was no air flow in this stone room, so it should be sealed. Zhuowen walked along the hanging corpses. His eyes were full of vigilance. He had felt a spying feeling in the stone room before, and now the feeling was even stronger. The black-robed woman entered this stone room before. The spying owner is probably the black-robed woman, right? Zhuowen's eyes flickered with coldness. After all, this was the black-robed woman's nest. The black-robed woman must be more familiar with this place than he was. Perhaps she was hiding somewhere and spying on him. Although Zhuowen was quite interested in the primordial spirits of the immortal corpses here, if he did not find the black-robed woman, he would not be able to refine the primordial spirits in these immortal corpses in peace. Passing through the rows of immortal corpses, Zhuowen quickly reached the end of the stone room. At the end of the stone room was a sealed wall. This wall was made of pale green bricks. Moreover, as he walked past rows of immortal corpses, Zhuowen found that the primordial spirits in the immortal corpses in this stone room were not very strong. Although they had been absorbed, the primordial spirits' pressure was not particularly strong. Therefore, he concluded that the immortal corpses here should have been earthly immortals when they were alive. Ka ka ka. Suddenly, the sound of gears turning abruptly rang out in the stone room. Zhuowen's pupils shrank as he found that the chains that had fallen on the iron pillars around the stone room had been unlocked. The immortal corpses that were originally hanging in the air had directly fallen to the ground. What made Zhuowen frown was that after the immortal corpses fell to the ground, they actually began to squirm, and their closed eyes suddenly opened. These were pairs of scarlet eyes that contained a bloodthirsty light. Hundreds of immortal corpses propped up their bodies and stood up. Hundreds of scarlet eyes fell on Zhuowen. Even Zhuowen felt his scalp tingle. Intruder, you dare to enter the 10th floor? You are really bold. Unfortunately, this place is not so easy to enter. You must be prepared to die. Suddenly, at the center of the ceiling of the stone room, an almost undetectable brick protruded. A black mist gradually spread out, revealing the black-robed woman. Xiao Xiao Studio. Com Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xi Xiao Xiao. Xiao. There is a mechanism. Is the 10th Xiao Xiao. Looking at the protruding bricks, Zhuowen revealed a thoughtful expression. Previously, this black-robed woman had entered the 10th floor through the protruding bricks in the middle of the white stone door. Now, she had exited through the protruding bricks at the top of the stone room. Perhaps there was another world above the stone room. Yes, there are still the 11th and 12th levels, but you won't be able to enter those places. This will be your burial ground. The black-robed woman laughed cruelly. With a wave of her jade-like hand, countless black fog gushed out. Under her control, the black fog transformed into thin black lines. These thin lines were like shuttles as they swiftly flew out, and actually connected with the chains at the back of the heads of the hundreds of immortal corpses. Suddenly, the eyes of the hundreds of immortal corpses erupted with an unprecedented red light. Their roars were like that of wild beasts, sounding exceptionally horrifying. However, the black-robed woman had to pay a price to control the hundreds of immortal corpses. Her face became even paler. Originally, she had given a portion of her strength to the middle-aged man. Then, under Zhuowen's pursuit, she had used a lot of her strength to make the illusion god in the black hole block Zhuowen. It could be said that the black-robed woman was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and she could only barely control these few hundred immortal corpses. Die. At this moment, the black-robed woman's eyes were filled with hatred. With a wave of her hands, the hundreds of immortal corpses below flew over like jackals and wolves, instantly wrapping around Zhuowen layer by layer. Zhuowen's eyes were full of seriousness. With a stomp of his right foot, the huge yellow spring slaughtering finger that broke into the stone room suddenly collapsed, turning into a huge ball of yellow spring water. Like an inverted waterfall, it hung in front of Zhuowen, forming a rather powerful defense. Boom, boom, boom. Hundreds of immortal corpses fell one after another on the yellow spring water, splashing out countless yellow water droplets. At this moment, the amount of yellow spring water on Zhuowen's body was extremely large. Because he had collected all the yellow spring water droplets from the Qin Tian tribesmen, he now had more than 500,000 drops. The power of the Yellow Spring slaughtering finger had also reached an unprecedented level. Unfortunately, there were hundreds of immortal corpses in front of him. These immortal corpses were all famous earthly immortals when they were alive. Even if they had been dead for many years, their bodies were withered and their primordial spirits were withered, but the strength of the earthly immortals was not weak. One or two Zhuowen might not be afraid, but hundreds of such terrifying earthly immortal corpses. Even with Zhuowen's Yellow Spring slaughtering finger, it was somewhat difficult to resist. Bang! 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 Countless Yellow Spring water splashed out. The defense of the Yellow Spring waterfall seemed to be in imminent danger at this moment. It was on the verge of collapse, as if it would collapse at any time. After 10 breaths of time, the Yellow Spring's waterfall collapsed with a loud rumble. The hundreds of immortal corpses had actually blasted open a hole that was several meters wide. Subsequently, the immortal corpses surged into the Yellow Spring's waterfall one after another, instantly drowning Zhuo Wen's figure. The black-robed woman's 10 fingers moved. Although her face was extremely pale and even her delicate body showed signs of collapsing, her eyes were filled with madness and hatred. No matter how strong you are under the joint attack of hundreds of immortal corpses, you will still have to nurse a grievance. The black-robed woman said coldly, "Sorry, I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you." An indifferent voice was heard. The black-robed woman's expression changed greatly, and the smile on her face completely froze. She was no stranger to this voice. It was the voice of the intruder. Just as she was about to turn her head to look, she found that she couldn't move her body. She didn't know when, but her body was actually covered by a dense number of curse seals. These curse seals were arranged in a mysterious pattern on the surface of her body, as if forming an extremely terrifying restriction formation, imprisoning her in this place. "When did you appear behind me? Who was that person just now?" The black-robed woman's pupils shrank. She turned her head with difficulty and saw Zhuowen behind her, wearing a loose robe, slowly walking in the air. Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, "That person just now was also me, and this person is also me." As soon as he finished speaking, the Yellow Spring waterfall in front of him instantly collapsed, and a vast hall rushed out. The immortal corpses that were flying over were directly knocked away. In the hall, another Zhuowen stood quietly. The one standing in the Azure Dragon Hall was Zhuowen's main body, and this time, the one who used the devouring curse seal to trap the black-robed woman was Zhuowen's mental strength doppelganger. As early as Zhuowen felt the feeling of being spied on, Zhuowen had already begun to be vigilant, so he secretly separated his mental strength doppelganger from his main body. His main body was in the open, and his doppelganger was in the dark. It could be said that his main body was like a bait, and the purpose was to lure out the black-robed woman hiding in the dark, while his doppelganger waited for the opportunity. When the black-robed woman appeared, he used the devouring curse seal to seal the black-robed woman with lightning speed. The doppelganger waved his sleeve, and the black thread that grew from the black-robed woman's fingertips suddenly broke. The many immortal corpses in the stone room also stopped in place, as if time had stopped. So that's how it is. "You've been playing with me before." The black-robed woman smiled bitterly. She was not stupid. She immediately straightened out the sequence of events and knew that she had been fooled. "We, the Netherworld's 4 envoys, have all fallen in your hands. I really didn't expect this," the black-robed woman said bitterly. "The Netherworld's 4 envoys?" Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He remembered the 3 human illusion gods he had killed before. Adding the black-robed woman in front of him, there were exactly 4 of them. Obviously, the Netherworld's 4 envoys should be the 4 human illusion gods, including the black-robed woman. "Just now, you said that there are 2 floors above the stone room. Take me to those 2 floors," Zhuowen said indifferently, his tone full of unquestionable authority. The black-robed woman coldly glanced at Zhuowen and said, "What do you think I will do? I advise you to give up on this idea. Take me there, and you can live. Otherwise, you will die immediately." Zhuowen did not talk nonsense with the black-robed woman. With the point of his right finger, the Yellow Spring water droplets condensed into a Yellow Spring death needle and pierced towards the black-robed woman's forehead. The black-robed woman's pupils shrank to the size of needles. She did not expect the intruder in front of her to be so decisive. He did not give her any room for negotiation and intended to kill her. Feeling the approach of the yellow spring death needle and the murderous intent in Zhuowen's eyes, the black-robed woman's heart was filled with fear. She hurriedly said, "Don't kill me. It was not easy for me to evolve from an illusion god to a human illusion god. Please don't kill me. If you don't want to die, then take me to the 11th and 12th floors." Zhuowen said indifferently. The black-robed woman trembled all over and hurriedly said, "I will take you there. I only ask that you don't kill me." Zhuowen took a deep look at the black-robed woman and immediately put away the yellow spring death needle. At the same time, his right hand formed a seal on the woman's body, and she was able to move freely. However, the black-robed woman bitterly discovered that although she could move freely now, the power in her body was sealed by a curse. It was impossible for her to use her power. After releasing the black-robed woman, Zhuowen's eyes flickered and he asked, "Now you should answer my question honestly, right? Apart from the 4 emissaries of the netherworld, what else exists in this place?" The black-robed woman clenched her teeth and sighed. "Apart from the 4 emissaries of the netherworld, there is also Her Majesty the Queen. However, Her Majesty the Queen is now in closed-door cultivation. We took the initiative to encircle and annihilate you. Her Majesty does not know about this." Her Majesty the Queen? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He did not expect the Queen to exist in this place, so he continued to ask, "Then where is this place?" The black-robed woman looked at Zhuowen in surprise and said, "This is the body of the Luo Yanjing. You have broken into it, and yet you don't know where this place is?" "The Luo Yanjing? It is the Luo Yanjing." Chapter 17:20. The 11th floor. At this moment, Zhuowen's brows were tightly furrowed. In the sea, Xiaohe and Cheng Huang seemed to be in an uproar. They were arguing noisily and looked extremely agitated. Zhuowen immediately realized that this so-called Luo Yan whale was not simple, so he asked in his heart, "Xiaohe, Xiaohuang, do you too know this Luo Yan whale?" At this moment, Xiaohe and Cheng Huang's surging emotions calmed down slightly. Xiaohe inhaled a deep breath of air and said in a deep voice, "I know. How can I not know? No wonder I do not recognize this place. It turns out that this is the interior of the smoke whale. However, why did the teleportation formation send us into the interior of the smoke whale? Perhaps the exit of the teleportation array was sucked into the Luo Yan whale's body for some reason. That's why Zhuowen appeared in the Luo Yan whale's body after entering the teleportation array. After all, the Luo Yan whale is extremely gluttonous," Cheng Huang said calmly. Xiaohe nodded. Cheng Huang's explanation was the most reasonable, but Zhuowen was still confused. He could not help but ask, "What is the smoke whale?" "He actually has a small world inside his body. This?" Xiaohe said in a deep voice. "Let's talk about the smoke whale when the time comes. Once you are completely out of the smoke whale, this dragon lord will tell you the origin of this smoke whale. This guy is inextricably linked to the war 10,000 years ago." Although Zhuowen had a lot of doubts in his heart, since Xiaohe said so, Zhuowen naturally did not ask. It seemed that if he wanted to know the origin of the Luo Yanjing, he would have to go out. Just now, Zhuowen's psychological change was completed in an instant. Although there was a change in his expression, it didn't change much. Moreover, he quickly regained his calm, so the black-robed woman didn't see any clues. "I did not mean to intrude, so it's understandable that I don't know where this place is, right?" Zhuowen said calmly. The black-robed woman nodded and didn't ask any further. She continued, "With my current authority, I can only bring you to the 11th floor. As for the 12th floor, I'm unable to enter it." "Why?" Zhuowen asked with a frown. "Because the 12th floor is where the queen is in seclusion this time. Moreover, only the queen can enter that place. If you don't want to die, I'd advise you not to enter the 12th floor. That's not a place you can enter," said the black-robed woman. "What kind of existence is the queen you speak of? Are they very strong?" Zhuowen asked. The black-robed woman's eyes were filled with fear. She said, "She's more than strong. She's the ruler of this place and the central controller of the Luo Yan whale. The queen has the power to dominate the entire small world. When the queen is at her peak, she can even awaken the Luo Yen whale and make it fight for her. However, since the Luo Yen whale fell into a deep sleep and the first queen died, all the other queens were unable to awaken the Luo Yen whale. Even so, the queen is still the ruler of this small world. She's an existence that can't be defied. Zhuowen frowned slightly. According to the black-robed woman, the so-called queen should be the ruler of this small world. Moreover, the queen was not the only one. Instead, there was a succession of queens. Although Zhuowen didn't know what the Luo Yen whale was, the beast's body contained a small world. It could be seen that this beast was extraordinary. The queen was definitely not ordinary to be able to control such a terrifying giant beast. Of course, from the black-robed woman's description, Zhuowen knew that the only one who could really control the Luo Yen whale was the first queen, who had already died. How can I get out of here? From the black-robed woman's words, Zhuowen knew that the queen was not easy to deal with. Therefore, he didn't want to meet the queen. Now, he just wanted to know how to get out of here. There are transmission arrays on the 11th and 12th floors. You can leave the small world. After I take you to the 11th floor, you can use the transmission array on the 11th floor to leave the interior of the Luo Yen whale. However, you must promise not to kill me, the black-robed woman said. Okay, Zhuowen said calmly. Now can you open the entrance to the 11th floor? The black-robed woman sighed softly. Soon after, she arrived at a rather remote corner of the stone room. She gently knocked on the surface of a brick, emitting a ding-dong sound. After 3 consecutive knocks, the brick actually caved in. Then, Zhuowen saw a ring-shaped depression in the center of the stone room ceiling. Zhuowen carried the black-robed woman, stepped with his right foot, and swept to the depression. Then he pressed his right hand against the depression and gently pushed it. The depression was easily pushed up, like a well cover, and was lifted by Zhuowen. After lifting the depression, Zhuowen saw blood sprinkling down from the top. However, Zhuowen didn't immediately go to the 11th floor. He slowly landed on the 10th floor. With a wave of his sleeve, all the immortal corpses in the 10th floor stone room were swept into the spiritual ring. These immortal corpses still had primordial spirits. Although most of these primordial spirits were dim, and their energy was about to dry up, they were still very useful to Zhuowen. You go up first, Zhuowen said coldly to the black-robed woman. The black-robed woman looked bitter. Then, under Zhuowen's control, she swept into the 11th floor, followed by Zhuowen. This was a blood-red world. When Zhuowen appeared on the 11th floor, he was so stimulated by the surging blood light that he narrowed his eyes. When he opened them, he sucked in a breath of cold air. What appeared in front of him was no longer the stone room from before, but pieces of meat walls. These meat walls were like walls, separated around Zhuowen, and the top was a dome. The surface of these meat walls was covered with crisscrossing veins. These veins were even constantly wriggling and twitching. What shocked Zhuowen the most was not the flesh walls and meridians, but the densely packed blood-red tentacles that covered the flesh walls. Moreover, the tentacles had thorns at their tips, and there were dried corpses hanging from them. These dried corpses were much more miserable than the immortal corpses in the 10th floor stone room. Their bodies were shriveled, and their skin was pitch black. Ribs could be vaguely seen, and they were full of death. Moreover, there were too many corpses like this, densely covering the surrounding meat walls. There were many more corpses here than on the 10th floor. Zhuowen looked over and calculated that there were no less than tens of thousands of corpses here. This was an extremely terrifying number. However, Zhuowen found that the corpses here were not like those on the 10th floor, where they were all immortal corpses. He even saw the old, weak, women and children among them. There was no fluctuation of saint power on these corpses, and they were obviously not warriors. This should be the feeding ground of the smoke whale. Basically, all the living things that are swallowed by the smoke whale will be placed here for it to absorb and replenish its own spiritual essence, Xiaohei said in a deep voice. Zhuowen was expressionless as he followed behind the black-robed woman. Even Zhuowen didn't want to stay here any longer. He just wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. The two of them, one in front and one behind, were silent. As they went deeper into this place, Zhuowen became more and more indifferent, and there was even a trace of killing intent in his eyes. This was because there were too many corpses here, and there were many mortals involved. The smoke whale seemed to be hungry, and no matter if it was a powerful warrior or a mortal, or even some powerful meta beasts, they were all sucked in and became its own nutrients. Along the way, Zhuowen even saw the corpses of celestial immortals. Originally, Zhuowen wanted to check on the corpses, but the surrounding tentacles were like tigresses protecting their cubs, attacking Zhuowen one after another. This forced Zhuowen to give up checking on the corpses. Moreover, as they went deeper, the number of corpses of celestial immortals increased, which made Zhuowen's face turn ugly. Wasn't this smoke whale a little too terrifying? It could absorb so many celestial immortals as its own nutrients and food. Finally, the black-robed woman stopped. She pointed at the meat wall in front of her and said, "There is a magic array up there. You can leave the smoke whale by entering that magic array. You go in first," Zhuowen said coldly. The black-robed woman glanced coldly at Zhuowen and said, "I don't need to lie to you about this kind of thing." After she finished speaking, the black-robed woman took a step forward and arrived in front of the meat wall magic array. Then, her right hand landed on the magic array, and she passed through it without any hindrance. It was as if the meat wall and the magic array had become weak and invisible water at this moment. It seems that the black-robed woman didn't lie to me. This magic array should lead to the outside world. However, before I leave, I must return the remaining Yellow Spring water droplets from the Yellow Spring massacre finger to the people of the Qintian tribe. Otherwise, they will be helpless when facing the illusion god in the future. Zhuowen formed a seal with his right hand and set up a temporary teleportation array. When he was in the tower of the Qintian tribe, he had set up a temporary teleportation array just in case. Now it just happened to come in handy. After setting up the teleportation array, Zhuowen pointed with his right hand. Instantly, 10 miles of Yellow Spring appeared around him. Then, Zhuowen took out 100,000 Yellow Spring water droplets from the Yellow Spring. With a flick of his finger, the remaining Yellow Spring water droplets rustled and poured into the teleportation array. The reason why Zhuowen did this was not only out of kindness, but also on purpose. This place had the illusion god, a sinful creature. Letting the people of this tribe cultivate the Yellow Spring massacre finger and cultivate the Yellow Spring water droplets was the fastest way. Furthermore, Zhuowen had left behind a teleportation array in the tribe. In the future, if the tribe developed the massacring finger of the netherworld, he could use the teleportation array to transfer the netherworld water droplets from the tribe to himself and develop the true power of the massacring finger of the netherworld. It could be said that this was the most correct method. At this moment, when the people of the Qintian tribe saw that Zhuowen had yet to return, some of them began to show irritation. All the Yellow Spring water droplets on their bodies had been taken away by Zhuowen. It could be said that the fruits of their painstaking cultivation had all been taken away. They originally thought that Zhuowen would return the Yellow Spring water droplets, but after waiting for so long, they still didn't see Zhuowen return. Chapter 17:21. Coffin Whoosh. 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 Just as the Qintian tribesmen were feeling vexed and suspicious, the tower in the middle of the tribe suddenly trembled. Immediately, the water of the Yellow Springs gushed out and covered the sky above the tribe. Whoosh. The water of the Yellow Springs dispersed from the sky and turned into droplets of Yellow Springs water. They fell like raindrops and entered the tribesmen's bodies. The people who were originally suspicious also fell silent. They looked at the countless Yellow Springs water droplets from afar, and the powerful energy that came with the Yellow Springs water droplets entering their bodies. Many people felt a trace of guilt in their hearts. Master Zhua saved our tribe and brought us the finger of Yellow Springs, helping us escape from the abyss of suffering. Master is our benefactor. Shouldn't our tribe be grateful and sing his praises? Alai, who had been silent, suddenly looked around at the tribesmen with cold eyes. Then he suddenly knelt on the ground and kowtowed towards the tower. His voice thundered through the entire tribe. After Alai knelt on the ground, Miao Yi, and Ai Yong, and Kong Yi also knelt on the ground. Their eyes were filled with gratitude and guilt. There was no doubt that the three of them had been influenced by others, and had also been suspicious of Zhuowen. However, Alai did not. He had always believed in Zhuowen. He would never forget the back of that figure that appeared in front of him the moment he was about to be killed by the feminine man. From that moment on, the fanaticism and respect in his heart reached an unprecedented level. He secretly swore that he would be loyal to that figure who saved his life. After Alai and the other three knelt, the rest of the tribesmen also knelt on the ground. Their faces were filled with shame. In front of the meat wall, Zhuowen transferred the remaining Yellow Springs water droplets into the teleportation array. His eyes flashed as he stared at the teleportation array on the meat wall in front of him. "It's time to go out," Zhuowen murmured. Just as he was about to step forward, the Buddha demon eye between his brows suddenly wriggled and let out a strange buzzing sound. What made Zhuowen even more astonished was that the Buddha demon eye actually left his forehead and shot out in a certain direction. Zhuowen was stunned. However, when he came back to his senses, he followed the Buddha demon eye without hesitation. His heart was filled with doubt. The Buddha demon eye's strange behavior really made Zhuowen confused. He did not know where the Buddha demon eye was going. However, Zhuowen knew that there was something here that was attracting the Buddha demon eye. As for what it was, Zhuowen did not know. The speed of the Buddha demon eye was extremely quick, and it was extremely familiar with this meat wall. Very quickly, it came to a stop in the depths of the left side. Its buzzing sound became increasingly frequent, and Zhuowen could even feel a deep sense of sorrow from this buzzing sound. When Zhuowen stopped here, he found that this place was actually an isolated space. Of course, this space was surrounded by a meat wall, and the surface of the meat wall was covered with many tentacles. However, this space was quite strange because there were no corpses on the tentacles. The tentacles here were densely packed as they extended towards the center of the space. The ends of these tentacles were actually connected to a huge coffin. The surface of the coffin was golden, as if it was made of gold. The densely packed tentacles extended from the flesh wall and completely wrapped around the golden coffin in the center. Zhuowen stared at the huge golden coffin. His mind trembled as if he had been struck by a heavy blow. The pressure emitted from the surface of the golden coffin gave him a sense of fear from the depths of his soul. This kind of pressure did not directly affect the body, but the depths of the soul. It was as if at this moment, this pressure invaded Zhuowen's soul, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily have the urge to prostrate himself in worship. It was as if Zhuowen was facing his natural enemy at this moment. A strong fear that he could not get rid of rose in his heart. The moment he saw the golden coffin, a voice rang out in Zhuowen's mind, telling him to kneel on the ground and prostrate himself in worship towards the golden coffin. Zhuowen could not help but retreat in shock. He did not dare to approach the golden coffin at all. What kind of existence is inside the golden coffin? It emits such a strange pressure. Also, why did the Buddha demon eye suddenly leave and come here? Could it be that the existence in the golden coffin is related to the Buddha demon eye? Zhuowen muttered in a low voice as an absurd thought suddenly appeared in his mind. The Buddha demon eye was the famous treasure of the fighting Buddha demon saint in ancient times. When the Buddha demon eye was mentioned, one would naturally think of the fighting Buddha demon saint. However, now that the Buddha demon eye had such a great reaction to the golden coffin, Zhuowen could not help but suspect whether the existence in the golden coffin was the fighting Buddha demon saint. Maybe it really is the warring Buddha demon sage. The aura of the existence inside the golden coffin is very terrifying. It is likely a true immortal stage existence. However, the warring Buddha demon sage had an illustrious reputation in ancient times. To think that he would end up in the belly of the smoke whale. I wonder what happened during the war back then. Xiao He said with a frown. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He looked at Xiao He and said in a deep voice, "If the fighting Buddha demon saint is really in the golden coffin, then what should we do now? Do we plan to save the fighting Buddha demon saint in the golden coffin?" However, Xiao He shook her head and said, "Can't you see that this is the core of the entire flesh wall space? If you do anything strange, it will definitely cause the countless tentacles here to go crazy. At that time, you will definitely die. You are too weak now. If you are strong enough in the future, you may be able to take out the golden coffin. However, you are powerless now. Upon hearing this, Zhuowen nodded. His thoughts were similar to Xiaohei's. He did not want to attract the attention of the smoke whale now. It was better to be as careful as possible. Thinking of this, Zhuowen's thoughts moved and he intended to take back the Buddha demon eye. Buzz. However, the Buddha demon eye buzzed and rejected Zhuowen's thoughts. Zhuowen groaned and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Evil creature, it actually resisted me directly. Zhuowen's face turned ugly. At this moment, the Buddha demon eye did not pay any attention to Zhuowen. Instead, it buzzed sorrowfully. With a swoosh, it turned into a residual shadow and swept toward the golden coffin. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Perhaps feeling the power of the Buddha demon eye, the tentacles wrapped around the golden coffin suddenly swept out and smashed toward the Buddha demon eye. The Buddha demon eye blinked and the Buddha light and the demon light swept out at the same time. The two energies merged and turned into a surging giant hand. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as the Buddha demon hand appeared, the tentacles that swept over collapsed and dissipated as soon as they touched the Buddha demon hand. Swoosh. The speed of the Buddha demon hand was extremely fast. In an instant, it had already reached the surface of the golden coffin. Soon after, the Buddha demon hand abruptly grabbed onto it and ruthlessly tore it apart. The countless tentacles that were wrapped around the surface of the golden coffin were completely torn apart by the Buddha demon hand. However, there were too many tentacles wrapped around the golden coffin. The Buddha demon hand's tearing was just a drop in the ocean. However, the tearing of the golden coffin aroused the anger of the surrounding flesh walls. The surrounding flesh walls began to squirm violently. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more tentacles began to sweep out from the surrounding flesh walls. These tentacles were much thicker than the ones wrapped around the golden coffin. Moreover, there were many more tentacles on the surface of the tentacles. Seeing so many tentacles, Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He quickly retreated, wanting to leave this space. Unfortunately, the entrance to this space had been sealed by countless tentacles at some point in time. Damn it, slaughtering finger of the underworld, break! Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He pointed his right finger and 100,000 underworld water droplets condensed into a huge underworld blade. He slashed down and heavily chopped at the countless tentacles at the entrance. Although he had cut off many tentacles, unfortunately, there were too many tentacles at the entrance. Moreover, after Zhuowen had cut off a portion of them, many more tentacles had emerged from the meat wall to fill in the gaps of the tentacles that had been cut off. There was a faint feeling that weeds could not be burned out, but would grow again when the spring breeze blew. These tentacles recover too quickly. If you want to leave, you have to cut all the tentacles in front of you into pieces in one go. Xiaohei said in a deep voice. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with bitterness. There were too many tentacles in front of him. With his current strength, how could he cut them all in one go? Whoosh whoosh whoosh. All of a sudden, Zhuowen heard the sound of something tearing through the air behind him. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold as he stomped on the ground with his right foot and spread out his lightning wings. He dodged the tentacles behind him at lightning speed. Boom boom boom. However, the main target of these tentacles was not Zhuowen, but the Buddha demon eye floating in the air. Therefore, it was not particularly difficult for Zhuowen to deal with them. At this moment, the Buddha demon eye and the endless tentacles were engaged in a fierce battle. The power of the Buddha demon eye was indeed terrifying. It was extremely proficient in the use of both Buddha and demon energies. The Buddha demon eye even automatically triggered the Buddha's 9 kowtows to heaven and demon's 10 perilous lands skills. What made Zhuowen even more depressed was that the Buddha demon eye had directly used the 9 kowtows to heaven and the 10 perilous lands skills, the 2 strongest skills. It should be known that even if Zhuowen had the Buddha demon eye, he could only use the 5 kowtows to heaven and the 6 perilous lands skills at most. However, the Buddha demon eye had used so much effort to save its original owner. This made Zhuowen feel quite unbalanced. Although the Buddha demon eye's combat power was terrifying, the tentacles that grew out from the surrounding flesh walls were not to be trifled with. Although countless tentacles were blasted into pieces by the Buddha demon eye, there were too many tentacles. They were densely packed together, and it was almost impossible to kill them all. Chapter 1722. Ancient Buddha and Ancient Devil Roar. 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 As the battle grew more intense, the flesh walls let out ear-piercing howls, as if they were enraged. The surrounding flesh walls began to shrink, and the tentacles that grew out began to converge, finally forming the image of a huge and terrifying blood-colored whale. The blood-colored whale was like a blood-colored bolt of lightning as it charged towards the Buddha demon eye. Wherever it passed, a fierce hurricane would sweep up. Zhuo Wen, who was standing in a corner, was only slightly affected by the hurricane. However, he felt as if his entire body was about to be torn apart. Zhuo Wen was so shocked that he hurriedly used various methods to protect himself. Only then was he able to barely block the hurricane's attack. The Buddha demon eye coldly stared at the incoming blood-colored whale. In the eye, golden light and black light constantly intertwined. In the end, the golden light and black light on the surface of the Buddha demon eye tacitly split into two sides, half golden and half black. Gotcha. Under Zhuo Wen's shocked gaze, the Buddha demon eye split into two. One was golden, while the other was demonic. After the Buddha demon eye split, half of the Buddha demon eye's Buddhist light soared into the sky, forming a huge Buddha shadow. The other half of the demon eye's demonic light shone, forming an evil demonic shadow. Regardless of whether it was the Buddha shadow or the demonic shadow, both gave Zhuo Wen a great shock. The Buddha shadow and the demonic shadow formed by the Buddha demon eye were much stronger than the Buddha shadow and the demonic shadow that Zhuo Wen had formed when he first used the Buddha demon eye. In fact, Zhuo Wen now had an extremely absurd feeling. The Buddha shadow in front of him was the origin of all Buddhas, and the demonic shadow was the origin of all demons. The Buddha was the origin of all Buddhist power, and the demon was the origin of all demons. The two were not ordinary Buddhas and demons, but the origin of Buddhas and demons. They were ancient Buddhas and ancient demons. At the beginning of heaven and earth, there were ancient Buddhas and ancient demons. Buddhas and demons were originally at odds with each other. Therefore, the ancient Buddhas and ancient demons fought a great war, shattering the 9 provinces and collapsing heaven and earth. In the end, the ancient Buddhas and ancient demons perished together. In the future, a monk who cultivated Buddhism and demons came to the beginning of heaven and earth and collected the origins of the ancient Buddhas and demons. With great wisdom and perseverance, he fused the two origins of the Buddhas and demons, finally forming the Buddha demon eye, Xiao Hei Chik. The Buddha demon eye's demon and demon eye's Buddha demon eye. The Buddha demon eye, demon eye, demon and Buddha demon eye. These two great phantoms were the origin of Buddha and demon. They were not something that ordinary Buddha and demon could compare to. The moment Zhuo Wen's gaze landed on the ancient Buddha and ancient devil's eyes, he was completely shocked. In those eyes he could see everything in the world. It was as if the world was evolving. In those eyes, there was a flourishing world. All forms are not forms. All living beings are not living beings. The ancient Buddha's lips opened slightly as he chanted a mysterious scripture. Immediately, a Buddhist light emerged above his head and turned into a wheel of light. This light wheel was too dazzling, and Zhuo Wen couldn't even open his eyes. Whoosh! At this moment, the blood whale's speed was very fast. In an instant, it was in front of the ancient Buddha. With a howl, its huge tail whizzed over. Instantly, countless splashing sounds could be heard. The ancient Buddha pinched his orchid fingers and struck out with a finger. Buddha light shot out in all directions and blasted the tail of the blood whale. Immediately, the blood whale abruptly retreated several hundred steps. Its entire body actually collapsed with a bang and exploded into a cloud of blood mist. However, this blood whale was extremely strange. After it exploded into a bloody mist, the surrounding bloody mist actually gathered together and reformed into a new blood whale. Moreover, the new blood whale was even bigger than before. Puff! Puff! At the same time, on the surface of the surrounding flesh wall, acupoints opened one after another like pairs of eyes. Then, terrifying surges of blood gushed out from these acupoints. There were too many acupoints. Countless streams of blood gushed out and formed a terrifying sea of blood in this space. This sea of blood gave Zhuo Wen an extremely great sense of danger. It was as if he was contaminated by even the slightest bit of this sea of blood, his entire body would collapse and he would die on the spot. At this moment, Zhuowen no longer held back. He immediately took out the Azure Dragon Palace and stepped into it. Standing in the middle of the Azure Dragon Square, Zhuowen formed a seal with his right hand and completely closed the Azure Dragon Palace. Not long after Zhuowen entered the Azure Dragon Hall, the sea of blood churned and surged with sky-shocking waves, slamming down. The entire blood-colored flesh wall space shook violently, and the Azure Dragon Hall was swept away by the sea of blood, drifting with the waves. Even though Zhuowen had hidden in the Azure Dragon Hall, he was still greatly affected. His entire body swayed and he could not stand steadily. In fact, he could still easily smell the bloody stench even with the Azure Dragon Hall as a barrier. The smell of blood was very strong and contained a pungent smell of corrosion. Zhuowen could even hear the sound of corrosion coming from the surface of the Azure Dragon Palace. Fortunately, the Azure Dragon Palace was not an ordinary object. Although the surface of the Azure Dragon Palace was corroded by the sea of blood, it recovered at an extremely fast speed. After all, the Azure Dragon Palace was a true immortal sacred artifact. It was the proud work of the Azure Dragon Taoist. Even without Zhuowen's control, it had a powerful self-healing ability. Even a true immortal would find it difficult to destroy the Azure Dragon Palace with his bare hands. Master, master, let me out quickly. I smell delicious food. Master, please let me out quickly. Suddenly, the Blood Immortal's impatient voice came from the spiritual ring, which made Zhuowen frown slightly. Zhuowen flicked his finger, and the Blood Immortal's figure suddenly appeared in front of him. As soon as the Blood Immortal appeared, her eyes were filled with greed as she looked at the sea of blood outside the Azure Dragon Palace. She quickly said, Master, the blood force in the sea of blood is extremely strong. You have to help me absorb this blood force. I can feel that the opportunity for me to break through and become an immortal depends on the blood force in the sea of blood. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He remembered that when he came in, the flesh wall had spat out blood mist twice. The blood mist was absorbed by the Blood Immortal. Zhuowen knew that the sea of blood and the blood mist before should be the blood of the Luoyan whale. He did not expect the blood of the Luoyan whale to be so suitable for the Blood Immortal's cultivation. However, when Zhuowen remembered that the Blood Immortal was originally a blood devil, he felt a lot more at ease. The Blood Devil clan originally relied on blood power to cultivate, and the Blood Devil was refined into a Blood Immortal by him, so the need for blood power was even greater. The Luoyan whale looked like an extremely powerful creature. The blood force in the blood of such a creature must be extremely strong. In the eyes of the Blood Immortal, the blood of the Luoyan whale was nourishment. The blood force in the sea of blood is too strong, and there is a great battle outside. It is not a good time to go out now, Zhuowen said coldly. The Blood Immortal was a bit impatient. The temptation of the Blood Immortal was too great. She wanted to rush out immediately. Now that Zhuowen forbade her from going out, she immediately became ferocious. Zhuowen, are you afraid that after I go out and absorb the Blood Immortal, my strength will increase greatly and I will become an immortal? You will not be my opponent and will not be able to control me. That is why you are stopping me, right? You are so narrow-minded. I, the Blood Immortal, have followed you wholeheartedly. If you let me out now and let me absorb the Blood Immortal, my strength will increase greatly after I become an immortal. It will be a great help to you, but you don't want to. You are just unhappy, right? If you are unhappy, then I will become an immortal before you. The Blood Immortal was flustered and exasperated. At this moment, the Blood Immortal's mouth was like a cannon. She said some very unpleasant words. At this moment, the Blood Immortal had completely lost her mind. However, Zhuowen just looked at the Blood Immortal indifferently. He did not respond, but just looked at her quietly. The Blood Immortal was a bit scared, and even her voice became lower. She knew that something was wrong, and immediately shut up. Speak, why did you stop? Zhuowen said lightly. The Blood Immortal immediately smiled and said, Master, I was a bit impulsive just now. The Blood Immortal was really too good for me, so I lost my mind for a moment. I hope Master will not blame me. Lost your mind? Then I will make you wake up. Zhuowen said lightly. He formed a seal with his right hand, and suddenly, dozens of blood-colored seals appeared and entered the Blood Immortal's body. The blood immortal immediately screamed and rolled on the ground, begging for mercy from Zhuowen. Before the battle outside stops, you will stay in the spirit ring. When it is time to give you benefits, you will not be left out. Now you better reflect on yourself. With that, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and immediately put the blood immortal into the spirit ring. He did not care about the blood immortal's begging at all. At this moment, Zhuowen's gaze fell on the Buddha and the blood whale that were fighting outside with great seriousness. The battle between the two was getting more and more intense. The entire blood sea kept rolling, and it often set off horrifying blood-colored waves. The azure dragon palace that was drifting with the waves was even more affected. Zhuowen could only try his best to control the azure dragon palace and stay far away from the battle. As for the ancient devil standing in the distance, he opened his demonic eyes that shot out demonic light in all directions. He coldly glanced at the Buddha figure and the blood whale, who were engaged in a fierce battle. He even glanced at Zhuowen, who was in the azure dragon hall. The moment the ancient devil looked over, Zhuowen's heart suddenly tightened. The ancient devil's gaze gave him a lot of pressure. It made his heart tremble, as if there was an unbearable mountain pressing down on him. Fortunately, the ancient devil's gaze did not stay on Zhuowen for too long. His demonic eyes fell on the golden coffin that was surrounded by countless tentacles not far away. His eyes shone with a shocking cold light. So, the ancient devil took a step forward, and his black robe fluttered. Demonic light poured out like ink. He instantly flew above the golden coffin. His right hand grabbed the air, and he pulled out a demonic sword that was dozens of feet long. The hilt of the demonic sword was made of white bones. At the intersection of the blade and hilt, there was a small skull. The skull's empty eyes were bursting with green flames. The blade of the demonic sword was surrounded by a misty demonic aura. This demonic aura lingered from the tip of the sword to the hilt, and it transformed into a small demonic dragon. Slash. The ancient devil's gaze was extremely cold. He softly spat out these words, and with the demonic sword in his hand, he suddenly slashed down. Chapter 1723. Fighting Buddha Demon Saint. As the demon sword fell, a large amount of demon chi soared into the sky, forming a terrifying black cloud in the sky. The black cloud covered the sky. When the black cloud had completely covered the entire space, a demon rain began to fall from the depths of the black cloud. The black raindrops fell from the black cloud, revealing a trace of demon chi. Under the demon rain, the demon sword finally hit the countless tentacles on the surface of the golden coffin. Immediately, the tentacles spat out a large amount of blood mist. Then, under the demon sword's swordlight, they were completely destroyed. Bang! 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 The tentacles exploded, and the restraints on the surface of the golden coffin fell off. The golden coffin fell to the ground with a dull explosion. Roar! Roar! When Ancient Devil held the demon sword and cut off the tentacles on the surface of the golden coffin, it completely enraged the surrounding flesh wall. The surrounding flesh wall began to wriggle violently again. Countless blood-red tentacles flew out and gathered together, forming many blood whales. This time, the flesh wall did not only form one blood whale, but more than 10. After the 10 blood whales formed, they went crazy and rushed toward Ancient Devil. After forming more than 10 blood whales, the flesh wall did not stop. It spat out even more blood water. In an instant, almost 2/3 of the entire space was covered by the blood sea. With the help of the blood sea, the blood whale's aura and power had increased tremendously. Ancient Devil squinted his eyes and slashed with the demon sword in his right hand. A huge black crescent-shaped sword light slashed out. Suddenly, more than 10 blood whales exploded into a large amount of blood mist. Waves of wailing sounds could be heard. Unfortunately, after the blood whales exploded into a blood mist, they reformed their bodies after merging with the blood sea. Their aura was even stronger than before. They were like cockroaches that could not be killed. Just like that, a dozen blood whales and the Ancient Devil fought. Although the blood whales were blasted into blood mist again and again, they were able to revive each time. And as the number of revivals increased, the power of the blood whales continued to increase. In a short period of time, the Ancient Devil, who had been attacking fiercely, was actually entangled by the dozen or so blood whales. As time passed, the ancient devil began to lose ground. On the other side, the ancient Buddha was still fighting with the blood whale. However, the blood whale that the ancient Buddha was facing now was much larger in size and aura. In the past, the blood whale was only 300 meters tall, but now, it had reached a height of 3,000 meters, and was on par with the ancient Buddhas. The ancient Buddhas were even being suppressed by the power of the blood sea. Little friend, can you help me open the coffin? You were able to obtain the Buddha demon eye, which means that there is karma between you and me. There must be a cause and effect. Since you obtained the Buddha demon eye and came into the body of the Luoyan whale, this is the cause. Relying on the Buddha demon eye, you found my coffin. This is the fruit. This is the feeding ground of the smoke whale, which is extremely difficult to deal with. If you were to rely on yourself, it would be impossible to escape. Only by borrowing my power can you escape. Zhuowen, who had been paying attention to the battle between the ancient Buddha and the ancient devil, suddenly heard a weak voice in his head. The voice was very soft, but to Zhuowen's ears it was unusually clear. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He could not help but ask, "Who are you?" "Little friend, there is no need to panic. Don't you have any idea who I am? Apart from you, who else is here?" The weak voice chuckled. Zhuowen squinted his eyes and looked at the golden coffin. He said, "You are in the golden coffin? You are the fighting Buddha demon saint?" "Yes. Little friend, I have been trapped in the smoke whale for too long. Finally, I have found you. You have obtained my Buddha demon eye, which means that you have karma with me. Now if you let me out, you will save yourself." The weak voice sounded again. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He frowned and looked at the golden coffin not far away. He was sure that the fighting Buddha demon saint was in the golden coffin. Otherwise, the Buddha demon eye would not have reacted so strongly. Moreover, Zhuowen had a vague understanding. When he obtained the Buddha demon eye, it was not only because of his good luck. Perhaps it had something to do with the fighting Buddha demon saint. Otherwise, he wouldn't have appeared in the Luo Yanjing's body out of nowhere. And he wouldn't have found the coffin of the fighting Buddha demon saint in the Luo Yanjing's body. All of this had already been planted when he first obtained the Buddha demon eye. However, this karma made Zhuowen feel very uncomfortable. After all, it made him feel like he had been set up. Perhaps the Dozhan Buddha demon sage had also sensed Zhuowen's emotional fluctuations. He sighed softly and said, "Although I am suspected of scheming, I have indeed been trapped in here for too long. I had no choice but to use this method. Little friend, I will definitely not treat you unfairly for saving me. If you have any requests, I will agree to them." Zhuowen's expression eased when he heard that. He stared at the golden coffin and pondered for a moment before saying, "Senior, after I save you this time, I want the Buddha demon eye and your strongest celestial technique." As soon as these words were spoken, the weak voice fell silent for a long time, and then it resounded once more. "I can give you my strongest immortal art, but I can't give you the Buddha demon eye. The Buddha demon eye is where my essence lies, and it's impossible for me to bring forth my peak combat strength without it. Of course, I will not treat you unfairly. After I escape, I can help you 3 times. This should be enough to make up for the Buddha demon eye, right?" Zhuowen furrowed his brows. The power of the Buddha demon eye was terrifying and Zhuowen was extremely envious of it. However, he also knew that it was the fighting Buddha demon saint who had arranged for him to obtain the Buddha demon eye. This was also the reason why he could not unleash the full power of the Buddha demon eye even though he had obtained it. With the fighting Buddha demon saint's existence, even if the former was willing to give the Buddha demon eye to him, the Buddha demon eye would probably not agree. Thinking of this, Zhuowen felt a little helpless. However, it was not a loss to be able to exchange for 3 chances for the fighting Buddha demon saint to help him. After all, the fighting Buddha demon saint was a very famous existence in ancient times. He was in existence at the peak of the true immortal realm. He was definitely an extremely terrifying existence. In the entire central region, there were not many existences that could be compared to the fighting Buddha demon saint. Of course, the divine master and old man that he had met in the broken skull abyss should be comparable to the fighting Buddha demon saint. After all, The pressure that the two of them gave Zhuowen was very terrifying. After thinking about it, Zhuowen also knew that this was a deal that was beneficial to him. After all, with his current situation, it was very difficult for him to escape this place with his own strength. Deal. However, how do I open the golden coffin? Zhuowen took a deep breath and said, I will teach you a chant. Follow the handprint in the chant and strike the outside of the coffin. I have already set up an extremely powerful escape formation inside the coffin for countless years. Now you only need to strike the handprint and you will be able to completely open the golden coffin, the fighting Buddha demon saint said. After saying that, the Dozhan Buddha demon saint passed on a rather mysterious chant to Zhuowen. Although the chant was profound, it was not difficult for Zhuowen to comprehend it with his cultivation. Moreover, he could clearly feel that the chant had been simplified by the fighting Buddha demon saint. Therefore, it was more convenient for him to comprehend it. After about half an incense stick's time, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes. He had already memorized the chant. As long as he was close to the golden coffin, he would be able to use the chant to open the golden coffin. However, Zhuowen looked at the dense blood sea in front of the golden coffin and the countless blood-red tentacles in the blood sea. His face became extremely solemn. The golden coffin was actually only a few hundred meters away from Zhuowen. However, due to the blood sea and the tentacles, this distance had become somewhat difficult. These tentacles are extremely sensitive to a true immortal saint weapon like the Black Dragon Palace. I am afraid that I cannot bring the Black Dragon Palace along. Otherwise, I will definitely be detected by the flesh wall. I am afraid that I will be besieged by these tentacles. After thinking about it, Zhuowen gave up on relying on the Black Dragon Palace. Instead, he waved his sleeve and summoned the Blood Immortal. Master, I was wrong. Please don't torture me anymore. The Blood Immortal immediately knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. Zhuowen pointed at the Blood Immortal's body and took back all of the blood imprints. The Blood Immortal let out a sigh of relief and quickly revealed a flattering smile. This time when we go out, you will help me to the golden coffin in front of us. At that time, if you want to absorb the blood sea outside, it is up to you. Zhuowen said lightly. Hearing this, the Blood Immortal immediately revealed a look of ecstasy. She quickly bowed and said, Thank you, Master. I will do my best to help you to the golden coffin. There will be no mistakes. Let's go. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and immediately opened the door of the Black Dragon Palace. Then the Blood Immortal suddenly rushed out and dived into the blood sea. She could not help but moan in a low voice. The Blood Immortal's body was covered with dense blood thunder. These blood thunder were like a whale sucking in water, constantly absorbing the blood force in the blood sea around them. At the same time, the Blood Immortal's body, which was dozens of feet tall, suddenly expanded to more than 10 feet tall. He landed in front of the palace door with a flattering smile. He bent down and said to Zhuowen with a smile, Master, quickly get on the little Blood Immortal's back. The little Blood Immortal will go to the golden coffin as soon as possible. Zhuowen's face was expressionless. He stepped onto the Blood Immortal's back. At the same time, he waved his sleeve and put the Black Dragon Palace into the spiritual ring. The Blood Immortal roared and stepped on the ground with her right palm. She immediately dived into the blood sea like a fish in water. Her speed was extremely fast as she headed toward the golden coffin not far away. The golden coffin was at the bottom of the blood sea. Although it was only a few hundred meters deep, the blood sea's resistance was great. It was also covered with dense tentacles. It was difficult for the Black Dragon Palace to reach the bottom. However, what made Zhuowen happy was that the Blood Immortal's speed was extremely fast. Her speed did not decrease in the blood sea. Whoosh! Whoosh! Chapter 1724. SS opening the coffin, Master. I'm counting on you. The Blood Immortal stomped on the ground, and the blood thunder spread out. She was very fast, and dodged the tentacles around her. However, there were too many tentacles, and she couldn't dodge all of them. So, she had to leave the rest to Zhuowen. Zhuowen nodded, and immediately took out the 1st and 9th Yongdao sword. At the same time, he used the slaughter finger of Acheron, and it turned into a huge yellow whirlpool. Basically, all the tentacles that came were blocked. Soon, the Blood Immortal brought Zhuowen a few dozen meters away from the golden coffin. With the Blood Immortal's current speed, she only needed one breath to reach it. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Suddenly, the blood sea around them began to roll, and formed many whirlpools in the water. Then, the surrounding tentacles went crazy, and quickly gathered in front of the Blood Immortal from all directions, and turned into a very thick red wall. And on the left and right sides of the Blood Immortal, there were even more tentacles that wrapped around the Blood Immortal like an inescapable net. Oh my God, Master, what should we do? There are too many of these things. How can we break through? The Blood Immortal complained to herself, and began to retreat. Zhuowen's face was also a bit pale. There were too many tentacles around them. With Zhuowen's current trump card, the only way to fight against so many tentacles was to explode his primordial spirit. But soon, Zhuowen thought of the eyeball that was still playing dead in his robe. He put his right hand into his collar, and pulled the eyeball out. At this moment, the eyeball kept rolling, and it even rolled its eyes at Zhuowen in a very human-like way, as if Zhuowen had disturbed its good dream. Zhuowen pointed at the wall formed by countless tentacles in front of them, and said in a low voice, "Help me break that tentacle wall." The eyeball rolled its eyes at Zhuowen again, and then it blinked at the wall in front of it. Suddenly, a black lightning flashed out. Whoosh! The black lightning was extremely sharp, and it hit the wall formed by the tentacles, and easily broke the wall into pieces. Go! Zhuowen's eyes lit up with joy. The black lightning produced by the eyeball was indeed extraordinary. It could easily shatter the barrier formed by the tentacles. The Blood Immortal let out a howl as it turned into a bolt of blood lightning and disappeared. When it reappeared, it was above the golden coffin. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and immediately swept the golden coffin into the Azure Dragon Hall. Soon after, he released the Azure Dragon Hall and quickly entered it. Boom! Boom! The moment Zhuowen entered the Azure Dragon Hall, the surrounding tentacles also arrived and bombarded the surface of the Azure Dragon Hall, causing it to shake violently. In the Azure Dragon Square, Zhuowen let out a light breath. Those tentacles in the sea of blood were not easy to deal with. If he did not have the mysterious eyeball, it would really be difficult for him to break through. Little friend, you can open the coffin now. I'm afraid the Buddha demon, I won't be able to hold on for much longer. A slightly hurried voice came from within the coffin. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. In the end, he followed the incantation given by the fighting Buddha demon saint. He pinched his right hand and hit the surface of the coffin. Creak! Suddenly, the lid of the coffin slowly opened, and a vast aura came out from the coffin. This aura was so terrifying that it caused the entire Azure Dragon Hall to shake. In the third heaven of the Azure Dragon Hall, somewhere in the first mountain god, who was sitting cross-legged, suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were like torches as they pierced through the heavy fog and landed on the Azure Dragon Square. The fighting Buddha demon saint? Although I knew that this kid had the Buddha demon eye and would definitely have karma with the fighting Buddha demon saint, I did not expect to meet this guy so soon. It seems that entering the smoke whale was the arrangement of the fighting Buddha demon saint. However, this isn't a bad thing for Zhuowen. He might even be able to form a good relationship with the fighting Buddha demon saint. In the future, he might even be able to receive help from the fighting Buddha demon saint. The first mountain god murmured in a low voice. Soon after, he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes, no longer paying attention to the Azure Dragon Square. Zhuowen took a few steps back and stared at the open golden coffin with bright eyes. At this moment, wisps of white fog came out from the golden coffin. As the white fog became more and more turbulent, a figure slowly sat up. Zhuowen took a closer look and discovered that this person was bald and as thin as a match. His cheeks were sunken in, and his eyes were deeply protruding. Rows of ribs could be vaguely seen on his naked upper body. A string of golden Buddhist beads hung around his neck. Zhuowen carefully looked at the skinny bald monk in front of him, and recalled the description of the fighting Buddha demon saint that he had seen when he had obtained the Buddha demon eye. He found that the two were somewhat similar, especially the pair of eyes that were bright and full of vigor. The fighting Buddha demon saint slowly stood up from the coffin, and then slowly stepped out of the coffin. With the first step, the fighting Buddha demon saint's originally weak aura gushed out like a volcanic eruption. With the second step, His skinny body slowly swelled up and the wrinkles on his body gradually became round. With the third step, his body grew taller and taller until he was about 10 feet tall. His hunched body also stood up completely. The aura on the fighting Buddha demon saint's body had reached its peak. As it was too terrifying, Zhuowen took a few hundred steps back before he could barely stabilize himself. He stared at the fighting Buddha demon saint in front of him in horror. Amitabha, little friend, thank you for releasing me from the shackles. I have stayed in the smoke whale for too long. It has been almost 10,000 years. Every day and night, the energy in my body was sucked away by it. It was not a good feeling. The fighting Buddha demon saint showed a self-deprecating smile. Senior, how do you plan to leave this place? Zhuowen asked respectfully. The fighting Buddha demon saint in front of him was a famous existence in the ancient times. He was at the peak of the true immortal realm. Although his celestial core power had been sucked away by the smoke whale for 10,000 years, and his realm and cultivation had fallen, his strength was still comparable to an ordinary true immortal. The fighting Buddha demon saint raised his head and said proudly, "Let's fight our way out." Zhuowen was stunned. The fighting Buddha demon saint's words were simple, but his tone was full of pride. However, with the fighting Buddha demon saint's strength, he did have the right to say such words. Little friend, you are in the Black Dragon Palace, right? Looks like your luck isn't shallow. You actually managed to obtain something from Taoist Songlong. The fighting Buddha demon saint gave Zhuowen a deep look. Zhuowen looked at the fighting Buddha demon saint and said in a deep voice, "Senior, do you know the Black Dragon Taoist?" The fighting Buddha demon saint laughed and said, "Of course I know him. He is a very interesting guy and also a guy that I admire greatly. I just don't know how the Black Dragon Taoist is doing now. However, after seeing the Black Dragon Palace, I know that guy is either dead or missing like me." Zhuowen was shocked. He did not expect that the fighting Buddha demon saint, who was famous in ancient times, would have such a high evaluation of the Songlong Taoist. It seemed that the Songlong Taoist was not an ordinary person in that era. Let's go. These are all things of the past. Now the first thing we need to do is to leave the smoke whale. As he said that, the fighting Buddha demon saint walked out of the palace door and took a step forward. Instantly, the surrounding sea of blood surged. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The countless tentacles that were originally on the surface of the Black Dragon Palace all rushed towards the fighting Buddha demon saint, who had walked out of the Black Dragon Palace. Bang bang bang. The fighting Buddha demon saint laughed and waved his sleeves. Suddenly, the tentacles burst into countless blood mists. The fighting Buddha demon saint stepped on the air and rushed towards the surface of the sea of blood like a shuttle. Wherever he passed, the sea of blood burst out with terrifying water pillars. Zhuowen, who was controlling the Black Dragon Palace to follow behind the fighting Buddha demon saint, looked at the scene in shock. The blood that gushed out from the flesh wall was not simple. It had an extremely strong resistance. The fighting Buddha demon saint was able to create such a huge commotion in the sea of blood. It showed how terrifying the former's strength was. At this moment, the eyes of the Buddha shadow and the demon shadow, who were originally trembling with the blood whale above the sea of blood, shone brightly. They turned into a ray of golden light and a ray of black light. They gathered together in the sky and formed a Buddha demon eye that was alternating between gold and black. The Buddha demon eye broke through the air, and at the same time, the fighting Buddha demon saint rushed out from the depths of the sea of blood. Countless huge waves of blood splashed out, and the Buddha demon eye drilled into the fighting Buddha demon saint's forehead. Ka ka ka. The moment the Buddha demon eye entered the fighting Buddha demon saint's forehead, a strange sound came from the fighting Buddha demon saint's body. Then, the Buddha demon eye on the fighting Buddha demon saint's forehead turned black on the left and gold on the right. In an instant, the left half of the fighting Buddha demon saint's body turned into a demon body, and the right half into a Buddha body. The fighting Buddha demon saint at this moment might be the real fighting Buddha demon saint that was feared in the ancient times. The fighting Buddha demon saint clenched his left demon hand, and demon chi gushed out to form a demon blade. Then he clenched his right Buddha hand and Buddha power gathered to form a Buddhist commandment blade. Today, I'll fight to my heart's content. I've been trapped in the stomach of this nuisance Luo Yen whale for almost 10,000 years. Every day, you've been squeezing my immortal core power. Today, I'm coming out and I'll teach you a lesson. The Dojan Buddha demon saint grinned and took a step forward. In an instant, he was in front of one of the blood whales. His left demonic hand slashed, and a terrifying demonic aura burst out from his demonic saber, cutting the blood whale into two. Bang! 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 The blood whale exploded into a cloud of blood mist. A demon light shrouded the blood mist. The blood whale that wanted to resurrect with the help of the blood sea collapsed into nothingness. The blood whale that could have been resurrected had lost its chance of resurrection under the slash of the demon blade. Zhuo Wen's eyes were filled with shock when he saw this scene. He clearly saw that the blood whale that had exploded into a bloody mist was about to be resurrected, but it was directly crushed by a vast amount of mana. Haha! Immortal body? How can there be an immortal body in this world? The reason why it's immortal is because it's not powerful enough. In the face of absolute power, even the sky can collapse. The fighting Buddha demon saint laughed. With a demon blade in one hand and a Buddhist commandment blade in the other, he took a step forward. As though he had teleported, he disappeared from the spot and swept past the remaining blood whales. Bang! 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 Chapter 1725. Gullet Roar. 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 The annihilation of more than 10 blood whales angered the flesh wall. The surrounding flesh wall spewed out blood-red tentacles. The tentacles gathered again and formed blood whales. This time, the flesh wall created hundreds of blood whales. They were densely packed in the space of the flesh wall. Great! The Dojan Buddha demon saint let out a long laugh. With a stomp of his foot, he shot out like a bolt of lightning. Every time he arrived in front of a blood whale, the blood whale would explode into a pool of blood, losing any chance of revival. At this moment, Zhuowen, who was following behind Dojan Buddha demon saint, looked at this scene in shock. Zhuowen clearly knew how difficult it was to deal with blood whales when the blood whale fought with the Buddha demon eye. If Zhuowen were to fight against a blood whale, he would definitely be suppressed to death, not to mention so many blood whales. However, Dojan Buddha demon saint seemed to be in an unstoppable state. He flashed out again and again, and the blood whales exploded into nothingness without any resistance. It was a one-sided massacre. Zhuowen stared at Dojan Buddha demon saint, who had both a Buddha body and a demon body at the same time. He completely felt the terror of Dojan Buddha demon saint. This feeling came from the bottom of Zhuowen's heart. Master, for the sake of my meritorious service, can you allow me to absorb the blood outside? Blood Immortal stood behind Zhuowen and stared greedily at the surging blood sea outside the Green Dragon Palace. She couldn't help but lick her lips. Zhuowen glanced at Blood Immortal and said plainly, "Now that the war is about to start, if you don't want to die, you better not go out." Blood Immortal was disappointed when she heard that. Although she was dissatisfied, she didn't dare to vent her anger on Zhuowen. She had been punished deeply before, so she didn't dare to provoke Zhuowen. However, you have indeed contributed. I will open the palace door and draw in some of the blood water for you to cultivate. As soon as Zhuowen finished his words, the Blood Immortal knelt down on the ground excitedly. She said with a flattering smile, "Thank you, Master. You are so wise, selfless, unparalleled, far-sighted, wise, decisive, and perceptive. All right, scram to the palace door. I'll help you draw the blood." Zhuowen kicked the Blood Immortal, and the Blood Immortal immediately gave up. She followed Zhuowen's order with a flattering smile, and came to the palace gate. The doors to the hall opened. Zhuowen made a hand seal and guided a portion of the blood water into the Azure Dragon Hall. After gathering the blood water into the size of a small pool, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and closed the doors once more. The Blood Immortal's eyes lit up. She giggled and jumped into the blood pool. She let out a comfortable moan. She felt a sense of gratitude towards Zhuowen. Of course, how long her gratitude could last was debatable. What bullshit, blood whale. You are not qualified to trap me. The fighting Buddha demon saint roared. He kicked out and slashed with the Buddhist commandment blade in his right hand. Suddenly, Buddhist chants echoed like an empty valley. Then countless Buddhist seals appeared in the flesh wall space. These Buddhist seals were densely packed, and there were too many of them. Soon, the remaining blood whales were sealed by the seals and fell into the blood sea one after another. Master, these blood whales are even more nourishing. I beg you, you must seize them. The blood immortal, who was moaning comfortably in the blood pool, saw the blood whales sealed by the Buddhist seals and fell into the blood sea. Her eyes lit up and she couldn't help but beg Zhuowen. Are they useful to me? Zhuowen said calmly. If these blood whales were only useful to the blood immortal, he wouldn't take them himself. After all, it wouldn't benefit him at all. Master, they are more beneficial to you. I can use a secret technique to combine the blood force of these blood whales with your blood essence. Then these blood whales can become your life substitute. In layman's terms, these blood whales have been refined by me. When you are in danger, these blood whales can die for you. The blood immortal clenched her teeth and said quickly. Zhuowen was shocked. He stared at the blood immortal and said in a deep voice, Are you serious? How do you know all this? The blood immortal looked confused and said, I don't know. When I saw these blood whales, I couldn't help but think of this secret technique. It's like it's innate in my memory. Don't worry, Master. I'm not lying to you. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He knew that this secret technique was probably the inherited technique of the Blood Demon clan. The Blood Immortal's predecessor was a Blood Demon, which was the clan closest to the ancient Blood Demons. Even if Zhuowen erased her memory, the inherited memory might still be in the depths of her mind. Okay. With that, Zhuowen made a gesture with his right hand. Suddenly, a huge pale dragon shadow appeared on the surface of the Black Dragon Palace. Then the pale dragon carried the Black Dragon Palace and set off waves of the blood sea. It swept toward the blood whales that had fallen into the blood sea. Very quickly, Zhuowen arrived in front of one of the blood whales. This blood whale was extremely large. At this moment, it was sealed by a Buddhist seal and had fallen into a deep sleep. Zhuowen did not hesitate to open the door of the hall and put it into the Azure Dragon Square. Whoosh! Whoosh! After taking the blood whale, Zhuowen didn't slow down. He continued to sweep toward the rest of the blood whales. When Zhuowen put away the 9th blood whale, a terrifying tremor spread throughout the space of flesh walls. Zhuowen raised his head abruptly. Above the blood sea, the flesh wall above the Dozhan Buddha demon saint had been blasted open by him. The hole was at least a few hundred feet wide. Endless blood poured down from the hole. It looked extremely mighty. Little friend, follow me closely. I'll take you out of here. The voice of the fighting Buddha demon saint rang in Zhuowen's mind. Then the fighting Buddha demon saint, who was floating in the air, stepped on the air and swept into the hole above. What made Zhuowen's pupils shrink was that the hole was being covered by the surrounding flesh walls at an extremely fast speed. In just a breath's time, 1/3 of the hole had been healed. Let's go. Zhuowen roared. He didn't care about the rest of the blood whales in the blood sea. He controlled the Black Dragon Palace and rushed into the hole above with a whoosh. After the fighting Buddha demon saint had made a huge hole in the flesh wall, the entire smoke whale's body began to go crazy. Countless flesh walls began to become chaotic. Waves of terrifying tremors came from the smoke whale's body. On the 12th level, a beautiful figure was sitting cross-legged in the dark space. She suddenly opened her eyes and muttered to herself, "Oh no!" Then she took a step and disappeared from the 12th level. This was a vast and distant blood-red tunnel. Both sides of the tunnel were covered with dense blood-red veins. At this moment, the tunnel was pulsating rapidly. There were even blood-red tentacles that often swept out from both sides of the tunnel. Sometimes, there were even acidic fluids that were spurting out from the top of the tunnel. Whether it was the blood-red tentacles or the acidic fluids, they could easily kill an ordinary earthly immortal. Fortunately, Zhuowen was following closely behind the Dozhan Buddha demon sage. With the Dozhan Buddha demon sage leading the way, Zhuowen had a much easier time. The Dozhan Buddha demon sage had basically cleared all the obstacles in front of him. This is the esophagus of the smoke whale. Be careful of the gastric acid that gushes out. The gastric acid of this smoke whale is very terrifying. Even celestial immortals may not be able to withstand it. Fortunately, you have the Azure Dragon Palace, but you still can't let your guard down. Don't take it too seriously. the fighting Buddha demon saint reminded in a deep voice as he glanced at the Black Dragon Palace behind him. Zhuowen nodded slightly and immediately said, "Since this is the esophagus of the smoke whale, does it mean that if I follow this esophagus, I will be able to reach the mouth of the smoke whale? Then I will be able to leave this place?" In theory, yes. However, from my observations over the past 10,000 years, the smoke whale is still in a deep sleep. Even if you reach the mouth, you will have to pry open the mouth of the smoke whale in order to get out, the fighting Buddha demon saint said in a deep voice. After that, the two of them, one in front and one behind, looked at each other in silence. After about a few days, the fighting Buddha demon saint suddenly said with a slight fluctuation in his voice, "We are almost there. I can feel it." Splash. Zhuowen's eyes were also filled with hope. However, soon, the sound of surging water attracted Zhuowen's attention. "What is that sound?" Zhuowen asked in surprise. Of course, as soon as he finished asking, a pungent stench suddenly surged up from below, causing Zhuowen to feel dizzy. Immediately, Zhuowen discovered that there was a stream of green liquid rushing up from below at an extremely fast speed. Damn it, it is the acid of the smoke whale. Although this beast is in a deep sleep, it still has some consciousness. It knows that we have left this place, so it is controlling the acid in its body to stop us. The fighting Buddha demon saint's eyes were gloomy. He took a step forward and stood in front of Zhuowen. Then he suddenly clasped his hands together. The Buddhist commandment blade, which was shining with Buddhist light, and the demon blade, which was shining with demonic light, merged together and turned into a strange long blade with alternating black and golden light. The long blade's aura was extremely vast. Even though it was quietly suspended in the air, the surrounding space still collapsed because of the long blade. It could be seen that the blade was extraordinary and terrifying. Slash. The fighting Buddha demon saint raised the blade in his right hand and suddenly raised it up. Suddenly, a blade light, which was mixed with Buddha and demon shadows, rushed out and bombarded the acid that was surging up. Bang, 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 bang. Wherever the blade light passed, the acid was cut into nothingness. However, the flesh wall around the esophagus wriggled violently. More and more acid rushed up from the bottom, one after another. Although the blade light was terrifying, it could not withstand such a huge amount of acid. In just a moment, the blade light was completely submerged by the acid and continued to rush toward Zhuowen with irresistible force. The Dozhan Buddha demon saint had a serious look on his face. He said to Zhuowen, "Little friend, go to the mouth of the smoke whale first. The suction force of the acid is very strong. With your strength, even if you have the Azure Dragon Palace, you will definitely be swept into the stomach by the acid. By then, you will have no hope of escaping. I will block the acid for you first. I will meet you at the mouth later." Zhuowen was stunned. He immediately looked at the back of the fighting Buddha demon saint and cupped his hands gratefully. He said, "Thank you, senior." Chapter 1726. Queen Zhuowen was extremely fast. After about an hour, he rushed out of the esophagus and rushed to the mouth of the Luoyan whale. The mouth area of the Luoyan whale was huge. At a glance, it was covered with dark red flesh walls. Zhuowen even saw sharp white teeth at the edge of the flesh walls. As soon as he entered the mouth, he could smell an unconcealable stench, causing him to frown slightly. However, it was much better than the acid that surged up from the stomach. Not long after Zhuowen entered, a low roar suddenly came from behind him. Immediately, the Dozhan Buddha demon saint took a step forward and rushed to not far behind Zhuowen. At the same time, the Dozhan Buddha demon saint made several seals in the void at his throat. Suddenly, the power of Buddha and demon burst out from his palms and formed a golden and black array at his throat. Puff, puff, puff. The moment the array was formed, the acid rushed up and hit the array, causing a rather ear-piercing muffled sound. The impact of the acid was extremely strong. However, the Dozhan Buddha demon saint was not someone to be trifled with. He continuously pinched his right palm, and thousands of Buddhist seals flew out. They formed a swastika symbol in the void and imprinted on the formation. Instantly, the formation became even more resilient. For a moment, no matter how strong the impact of the acid was, it was still blocked by the array. This Luoyan whale is really difficult to deal with. Even if it is in a deep sleep, it is still so relentless. If it wakes up, it will be even more troublesome. The Dojan Buddha demon saint said to himself with a sigh. Zhuowen stared at the Dojan Buddha demon saint, and immediately asked, "Senior, this should be the mouth of the Luoyan whale. However, the Luoyan whale should be unusual. Do you really plan to wake it up?" The Dojan Buddha demon saint patted his bald head and said, "This is the only way now. If we don't make the Luoyan whale open its mouth, we can't get out at all. Little friend, I still don't know your name." "I am Zhuowen. What is Senior's name?" Zhuowen looked at the Fighting Buddha demon sage. He knew that the Fighting Buddha demon sage should be an honorific. As for his real name, it was naturally not the Fighting Buddha demon sage. My Dharma name is Shurji. As for my name, even I have forgotten it." The Fighting Buddha demon saint smiled faintly. Zhuowen nodded. Just as he was about to speak, Xiaohei suddenly shot out from between his brows and floated in front of the Fighting Buddha demon sage. "Baldy Shurji, the smoke whale is too terrifying. Are you planning to harm us by awakening it? Once the smoke whale awakens and charges into the Central Plains, it will definitely be a great calamity for the Central Plains," Xiaohei said coldly. You are the Abyss Holy Dragon?" He never thought that he would be able to meet an old friend here. Also, wasn't this little fellow's luck too great? Not only does he have the Azure Dragon Hall of the Azure Dragon Taoist, but he also has an existence like you assisting him. The Dojan Buddha demon saint suddenly turned solemn. He sized Zhuowen up and down with a cautious gaze. Actually, most people were not particularly clear about the origin of the Abyss Holy Dragon. He did not know much about it either. However, he knew that the Abyss Holy Dragon was definitely not an ordinary existence in the ancient times. In that era, the Abyss Holy Dragon's strength might not be able to defeat the Fighting Buddha demon sage. However, in the ancient times, as long as the Abyss Holy Dragon was mentioned, most forces would tremble in fear. The reason for this was that the Abyss Holy Dragon had the backing of a terrifying figure that the entire continent feared. This person was called Songjia. In the ancient times, Songjia was hailed as the most powerful person in the continent by many sages. The Fighting Buddha demon sage did not know the exact cultivation of this person. However, he knew that this person's cultivation must have reached the divine transformation realm. In the catastrophe 10,000 years ago, the war was extremely fierce and involved all the experts in the continent. Songjia also participated in that war. The war was too terrifying. The Fighting Buddha demon sage did not know what the outcome was. This was because before the war reached its climax, he was hit by a giant hand and almost died. Even his Buddha demon eye was shattered, and was later swallowed into the stomach of the fog whale. The Fighting Buddha demon sage was actually not very clear about what happened after that. Without a doubt, the Abyss Saint Dragon was an extremely prideful existence. Although the Abyss Saint Dragon was only left with an incomplete spiritual body, the Dojan Buddha demon saint knew that the Abyss Saint Dragon's pride was ingrained in its bones. It was precisely because of this arrogance that the Abyss Holy Dragon would not casually attach itself to anyone. However, the Abyss Holy Dragon actually attached itself to the body of the young man in front of him. It did not seem to show any signs of rejection. The Fighting Buddha demon sage was naturally quite surprised. Therefore, at this moment, the Fighting Buddha demon sage also realized that the young man in front of him was not simple. It was also the first time he began to take Zhuowen seriously. It's not that he is too lucky, but that everything is destined by the heavens. Otherwise, do you think this dragon lord will follow him? Xiaohei said coldly with his paws crossed in front of his chest. The Fighting Buddha demon sage's pupils shrank slightly. He stared at Xiaohei and said, "You mean this is the will of that lord?" Xiaohei waved his hand and said, "You can understand it that way. However, it's best that you don't ask too much about this matter. I want to ask you, do you really intend to use such a barbaric method to get out? Waking up the fog whale is not a joke. Back then, Master went through untold hardships to put the fog whale into a deep sleep. However, you actually plan to wake it up. Are you trying to kill everyone in the continent?" Shiji scratched his bald head. He pointed at the surroundings and said, "Then tell me, if we don't wake up the fog whale, how are we going to get out?" Xiaohei snorted coldly and said, "Other than the mouth of the fog whale, there is another exit. That is where the fog whale is released. However, that place is the core of the fog whale. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for us to find it. Since we are already here, do we still have to go back the way we came to find the place where the fog whale is released?" Shiji said with a frown. As soon as Shiji finished speaking, a murderous glint flashed in his eyes. Then he suddenly shouted behind him, "Who is it? Do you think that I don't know who you are hiding in the dark?" Zhuowen's pupils shrank and his entire body tensed up. He actually did not notice that there was someone here. If it were not for Shiji's reminder, he probably would not have known that there was someone hiding here. However, Shiji's response was a period of silence. It was as if there was no one hiding here, as he had said. "You don't want to come out? Fine, I'll come and find you." Shiji laughed coldly. Then he walked towards a white sharp tooth on his left. "You don't have to come over. I'll come out." A clear and cold voice sounded. Immediately, ripples appeared on the surface of the white teeth, and a beautiful figure slowly stepped out from the ripples. This was a woman with a rather hot figure. However, this woman was wearing a black and white circle mask on her face, so her true appearance could not be seen clearly. However, judging from her figure and temperament, this woman's appearance was beautiful even if it was not devastatingly beautiful. As soon as this woman appeared, her pair of watery eyes fell on Zhuowen in a daze. Her gaze contained a complicated expression. This woman's gaze naturally could not escape Zhuowen's notice. Especially when he noticed the complicated expression on this woman's face, he was rather puzzled. He did not know why this woman would reveal such a strange expression. "It seems that you are the current queen of the fog whale?" Xiaohei looked at the woman from head to toe and said indifferently. Zhuowen revealed a look of understanding. He had heard about the queen from the black-robed woman before. It seemed that what the black-robed woman said was true. Speaking of the black-robed woman, if it were not for the Buddha demon, leading him into the flesh wall space, the black-robed woman would have stepped into the magic array of the 11th floor. Now that he thought about it, if that magic array was really the exit, with the character of the fighting Buddha demon saint, he would definitely say it. However, the fighting Buddha demon saint did not say anything. Instead, he followed the fog whale's esophagus all the way to its mouth, intending to force his way out. It could be seen that the magic array mentioned by the black-robed woman was most likely fake. Thinking of this, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a cold light. There was no need to guess that the other side of the magic array was not a good place. It seemed that the abnormal movement of the Buddha demon should be a warning to him. The woman glanced at Xiaohei indifferently. She did not admit or deny it and continued, "I can take you to where the fog whale is and let you leave this place." The fighting Buddha demon saint and Xiaohei narrowed their eyes at the same time. Xiaohei sneered, "You are so kind. After all, we are intruders. Are you going to give up a free energy source like the fighting Buddha demon saint? I don't believe it." The woman sighed softly and said, "I'm the previous queen, and I haven't completely mastered the smoke whale. If you rashly awaken the smoke whale, it won't do you any good either. This is why I'm going to let you go." As for the fighting Buddha demon saint, it was the first queen who arranged for him. "It has nothing to do with me. I just don't want to cause unnecessary trouble now, so I intend to let you leave. Of course, if you're still not satisfied, even if I haven't completely mastered the energy inside the smoke whale, I'll still risk my life and perish with you. We'll all go our separate ways and perish together." For a moment, both sides fell silent. The atmosphere suddenly became a little tense and strange. "Then we will believe you for now. If you are not sincere at all, with our lineup, you may not be able to trap us." Xiaohei nodded. The queen sneered and said, "Don't worry, I can't wait for you to leave. Now come with me." With that, the queen turned and entered the white teeth behind her. It was as if she did not particularly care about Xiaohei and the other two. "Let's go in too," Xiaohei said. With that, the fighting Buddha demon saint also walked in. Zhuowen followed closely behind. The moment he approached the white teeth, Zhuowen felt a slight ripple on the surface of the teeth. Then, his right hand entered the teeth without any hindrance. It seems that there is some kind of camouflage on top. Chapter 1727. The king does not know his concubine. What appeared in front of Zhuowen was a deep passage made of flesh. The queen was walking quietly in front of him, with the Dozhan Buddha demon saint following closely behind. Zhuowen also brought Xiaohe with him as he did not want to be outdone. The passage was quite strange as it was surrounded by blood-red whirlpools. When Zhuowen took a step forward, he felt as if he had teleported. It was as if he had taken a very long step forward. The three of them were silent as they walked in the passage for half a day. Zhuowen squinted his eyes as he realized that there was an extremely thick gray fog in front of him. This gray fog. Zhuowen felt that this gray fog was very similar to the gray fog that he had seen above the Shattered Memories swamp. The only difference was that the gray fog above the swamp was much thinner, while the gray fog here was much thicker and darker. This should be the Luo Yen, which is also the signature feature of the Luo Yen whale. This Luo Yen whale has an extremely strong hallucinogenic effect. Of course, it also has a highly toxic effect. If an ordinary person accidentally comes into contact with this Luo Yen whale, they would immediately lose themselves and die. Xiaohe said in a deep voice. Also, the gray fog above the Shattered Memories swamp might have something to do with this Luo Yen whale's Luo Yen whale. It's just that I didn't think about it in detail at that time. Zhuowen nodded and immediately mobilized the saint energy in his body. He sealed off his 5 senses and stepped into the gray fog. The gravity of the gray fog was much stronger than the outside world. When Zhuowen first entered, his body swayed a little. However, he quickly regained his balance. However, the Luo Yen whale's penetrative power was extremely strong. Although Zhuowen had sealed off his 5 senses, the Luo Yen whale still adhered to the surface of Zhuowen's skin. Zhuowen only felt a piercing pain. He saw that the Luo Yen whale that adhered to the surface of his skin had condensed into thin needles, and was about to pierce into Zhuowen's body. Zhuowen's face turned pale. He immediately summoned the soul-devouring lava river, and used the devouring power of the lava to devour the Luo Yen whale that permeated his body. Just as Zhuowen was tired of dealing with the Luo Yen whale around him, a beautiful figure suddenly swept to his side. Luo Yen whale's Luo Yen whale. Zhuowen's whale's Luo Yen whale. Luo Yen whale. Luo Yen whale. Zhuowen's heart relaxed, and then he stared at the queen in surprise. He didn't expect that the queen would suddenly appear by his side and help him disperse the surrounding smoke. Perhaps sensing Zhuowen's astonished gaze, the queen's beautiful eyes turned slightly as she lightly said, "Once the Luo Yen enters your body, it will leave behind hidden dangers. Since I promised to take you out, I naturally won't let anything happen to you. Now you wail now." With that, the queen naturally took Zhuowen's right hand and walked forward slowly. When Shiji saw this scene, he scratched his head and did not suspect anything. Instead, it was Xiaohe who narrowed her eyes and stared coldly at the queen's back. Zhuowen frowned slightly, but he did not reject the queen's actions. However, he was extremely puzzled in his heart. When he thought back to the queen's complicated gaze when she first appeared, he faintly felt that the queen's attitude towards him was somewhat different. The deeper they went, the denser the Luo smoke became. However, these Luo smoke seemed to be extremely fearful of the queen. Wherever the queen passed, they would retreat. Whoosh! Whoosh! About an hour later, Zhuowen discovered that the Luo Yen in front of him had become even denser. Furthermore, the Luo Yen in front of him had actually formed a huge whirlpool of air that was constantly rotating. This whirlpool of air swept upwards in a counterclockwise direction. At the end of the Qi pillar was a dark void. This Qi pillar led to the outside world. The outside world is at the end of the Qi pillar. Let me send you out of here. The queen waved her jade-like hand. Suddenly, the whirlpool of air that was constantly rotating suddenly stopped. Then, the queen rolled up her sleeves and the Qi pillar suddenly collapsed. Looks like you've kept your promise. The Dozhan Buddha demon sage cupped his fists and immediately leaped up. He directly jumped out of the void above and quickly disappeared from this place. Are you still not leaving? The queen turned around and asked Zhuowen, who was behind her. Zhuowen looked deeply at the queen in front of him and suddenly said, "Have we met before?" The queen was stunned and a rare trace of panic appeared in her eyes. However, she quickly regained her composure and shook her head. "No." Zhuowen was silent for a moment. Then he cupped his fists and said, "Thank you for your help. Goodbye." After speaking, Zhuowen did not linger. He took a step forward and left this place. After Zhuowen left, the qi pillar that was originally stagnant was regenerated and spewed upwards. The queen's beautiful eyes looked at the void that was filled by the qi pillar again and sighed. "You don't recognize me, but I recognize you. The next time we meet, maybe you can recognize me." A faint voice reverberated in the pillar of air. The voice was filled with a faint sadness, like an injured lamb licking its wounds in a remote corner. After flying out of the void, Zhuowen realized that the void was actually the Luo Yen whale's jet. At this moment, as soon as Zhuowen walked out of the void, a surging qi pillar was once again spewed out. Then a thick gray fog covered the Luo Yen whale's huge body. "Zhuowen, follow me." As soon as Zhuowen came out, Shiji placed his right hand on Zhuowen's shoulder. Immediately, the surrounding space was distorted. When Zhuowen came out, he was already hundreds of thousands of miles away. Teleportation. Zhuowen had a look of understanding. The middle-aged man who called himself the Divine Master had also used this teleportation divine ability before. The distance he could teleport in an instant was much further than teleportation. In an instant he could travel hundreds of thousands of miles. Standing in the void hundreds of thousands of miles away, Zhuowen stared at the gray fog in front of him. In the gray fog, there was a huge black shadow looming. Zhuowen knew that the black shadow should be the Luo Yen whale. As the gray fog became thicker, Zhuowen even had an illusion that the gray fog had merged with the surrounding void. The black shadow he saw was no longer there, but a void. The Luo Yen whale has the ability to cause hallucinations and hallucinations. It seems that Xiaohe was right. Zhuowen looked at the Luo Yen whale that was hidden in the void, because of the Luo Yen whale. Then he looked around and found that there were huge fragments of continents floating in the void. "It seems that I'm still in the broken centipede abyss," Zhuowen murmured in a low voice. "Zhuowen, this is my communication jade token. It contains my divine sense brand. I promised you that if you save me, I'll fight for you 3 times. This communication jade token can be used 3 times. After 3 times, it will break, so use it carefully." Shiji passed a golden jade token to Zhuowen in a rather cautious manner, and then he continued. "This communication jade token contains my strongest immortal art, Buddha Inquires and Devil Transformations. This immortal art is divided into 2 parts. One is Buddha Inquires, and the other is Devil Transformations. Its might can't be underestimated." Speaking of this, Shiji seemed to be a little apologetic. After all, Zhuowen came with the Buddha Demon Eye and released him. It was not right for him to take back the Buddha Demon Eye. "Zhuowen, I see that your cultivation has reached the heaven-defying saint realm. Although you are still far from the earthly immortal realm, you are not far from the half-immortal realm. I will personally help you to reach the half-immortal realm." After saying that, Shiji bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood essence. After that, he pointed the sword finger of his right hand at the blood essence that he had spat out. Then he brought the blood essence into Zhuowen's forehead. Zhuowen opened his eyes. The moment the blood essence entered his body, he felt a vigorous and vast power enter his body from the space between his eyebrows, causing his aura to reach an incredible level. Moreover, Shiji's blood essence was like a snake. It followed Zhuowen's meridians and swept into the origin core in his dantian. At this moment, the origin core, which was overflowing with golden light, was stained with blood. Traces of cracks appeared on it, and the cracks grew bigger and bigger. They spread to more than half of the origin core's surface area, and then stopped spreading. Zhuowen knew very well that once the origin core was completely shattered, it would completely transform into a primordial spirit. At that time, he would naturally be able to advance to the earthly immortal realm. However, his foundation was still not enough. Even Shiji's blood essence could only push his cultivation to the half-immortal realm. After more than half of the origin core was cracked, the saint energy in his dantian rushed into the origin core. When all the saint energy in his dantian had rushed into the origin core, milky white celestial core power began to erupt from the cracks in the origin core. Without a doubt, celestial core power was much more scarce than saint energy. However, its quality far surpassed saint energy. When Shiji slowly retracted his sword finger, his eyes showed some fatigue. After all, he had used his own blood essence to forcibly raise Zhuowen's cultivation to the half-immortal realm. This method of forcibly raising one's cultivation did not have any side effects. It could be said that Shiji's method was extremely benevolent. Therefore, when Zhuowen discovered his own condition, he quickly bowed to Shiji and cupped his hands. "Thank you for your selfless gift, Senior Shiji." Shiji waved his hand and said, "There's no need to say that. You've already done me a great favor by releasing me from the fog whale. Moreover, I've also rudely retracted the demon Buddha eye. In fact, I've taken advantage of you." After saying that, Shiji looked around and said, "Zhuowen, do you plan to go out with me now?" Zhuowen shook his head and said, "I don't plan to go out now. I plan to go out later." Shiji nodded and said, "I still have some doubts from back then. I want to go out and verify them. Therefore, I'll take my leave first. If you need anything, you can use the communication jade token to summon me. I can teleport to your side in a short time." "I understand," Zhuowen said in a deep voice. Shiji nodded and then took a step in the air. The space around him instantly distorted, and he disappeared from Zhuowen's sight. "I'm afraid that the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan have already found out about Jiang Zuomei and Lei Qingtian's deaths. I'm afraid that I'm now wanted by those two clans. Moreover, the divine battle that the middle-aged man spoke of is definitely not simple. It's not good for me to go out rashly." Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He'd gained a lot this time, and there were some things that he hadn't had the time to digest. He planned to digest all of them before going out. At that time, unless the ancestors of the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan personally came, he wouldn't be afraid at all. Chapter 1728. SS Blood Substitution Method. Zhua, when randomly picked a fragment of a continent and found a rather powerful restriction on it. He used the Devouring Curse restriction to repair it and make it even more powerful. Then he sat down cross-legged and began to cultivate. Shiji had just used his own essence blood to raise his cultivation to the half-immortal level. If he didn't stabilize it, it would affect his foundation in the future. 3 months later, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes, and cracking sounds could be heard coming from his body. Soon after, an extremely overbearing hurricane swept out from his body. His aura had also increased slightly, and his cultivation had completely stabilized at the half-immortal realm. Moreover, Zhuowen had also used these 3 months to absorb all the saint energy in his dantian into his primary core, allowing it to brew into powerful celestial core power. Therefore, the saint energy in Zhuowen's dantian had long since disappeared, and was filled with celestial core power. Of course, the amount of immortal core power in his dantian was still not comparable to that of an earth immortal. However, with immortal core power, Zhuowen's immortal core power was much more powerful than before. This was the benefit of immortal core power. It's only been 3 months. This time, I have gained a lot from the smoke whale. Among them, the immortal corpses and blood whales were unexpected surprises. Speaking of this, Zhuowen waved his sleeve. Immediately, he took out hundreds of immortal corpses, and the 9 blood whales sealed by the Buddhist seal. Of course, he also let the blood immortal out. Zhuowen stared at the blood immortal and said lightly, "You said before that the blood whale can be my substitute and can die for me once?" The blood immortal nodded and said, "I do have memories about this in my memory. This secret technique is called the blood substitution technique. But the prerequisite of this secret technique is that it must be a creature with enough blood power. The blood power of this blood whale is even denser than that of the blood sea. It can definitely perform the blood substitution technique." Speaking of this, the blood immortal sized up Zhuowen and said, "The success rate of this blood substitution method is not very high. So, the success rate is not high? Zhuowen coldly glanced at the blood immortal and continued. You must succeed in one of these 9 blood whales, or else I will let you taste the taste of regret. The blood immortal's gaze turned cold. However, after meeting Zhuowen's cold gaze, she shrunk her neck and didn't dare to say more. She quickly said, Master is right. I will definitely succeed. Speaking of this, the blood immortal rubbed her hands and said with a flattering smile, Master, if one succeeds and there are still some left, can you give the rest of the blood whale to the blood disciple to absorb for cultivation? Zhuowen glanced at the blood immortal and said, Sure. As long as you can successfully make one, I can give you the rest. To Zhuowen, an item that could replace one's life was definitely an extremely precious item. After all, to a cultivator, especially a powerful cultivator, life could be said to be priceless. Joy filled the blood immortal's eyes. Under Zhuowen's guidance, the blood immortal flew to the 9 blood whales that had been placed to the side. Then, he randomly chose a blood whale, and began to silently form a seal. Blood lightning filled the air and immediately enveloped the blood whale. Zhuowen silently watched for a while. Then he separated his mental energy doppelganger, and let it watch the blood immortal refine the blood whale. Meanwhile, his eyes shined as he looked at the hundreds of immortal corpses on the other side. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and swept an immortal corpse over. Then his right hand reached into the immortal corpse's abdomen and pulled. An extremely weak primordial spirit was pulled out. The primordial spirit in Zhuowen's hand was dim and lifeless. It even had a dull expression, like a numb puppet. Moreover, the primordial spirit had shrunk to the size of half a palm. Looking at the shrunken primordial spirit in his hand, Zhuowen frowned. He didn't expect the primordial spirit in the immortal corpse to be so weak. It was as if it could collapse and disappear at any time. This primordial spirit is too weak. I'm afraid it will collapse during the process of making the primordial spirit bomb. If this primordial spirit bomb is made with this primordial spirit, it will definitely collapse. Zhuowen frowned. Let's try that method. Zhuowen formed a seal with his right hand. Instantly, he used the devouring curse to create a palm-sized black whirlpool. Then, the primordial spirit was immediately sucked into the black whirlpool. At the same time, Zhuowen grabbed another immortal corpse and withdrew his primordial spirit from its dantian. Without a doubt, the primordial spirit of this immortal corpse was still shrunken to the point of being only the size of half a palm. Zhuowen was expressionless as he continued to control the black whirlpool to suck in the primordial spirit. Zhuowen grabbed immortal corpses one after another and sucked their primordial spirits into the black whirlpool. After absorbing about 100 immortal corpses' primordial spirits, the black whirlpool emitted a terrifying aura. Zhuowen's eyes shone with unprecedented brilliance. Zhuowen waved his sleeve. Under his control, the black whirlpool slowly dissipated. A palm-sized primordial spirit with a powerful aura appeared in his palm. Because the primordial spirits in the immortal corpses were too weak, Zhuowen used the devouring curse to forcefully fuse the primordial spirits of the immortal corpses together. In the end, he succeeded. The primordial spirit's aura was extremely powerful. It was even slightly stronger than the primordial spirits of Jiangzuome and Lei Qingtian. If the primordial spirits of these immortal corpses can be fused together, can I fuse all the remaining primordial spirits together? The primordial spirit formed in the end will be extremely powerful. Then won't the primordial spirit bomb be extremely powerful? Zhuowen's eyes lit up as this crazy idea suddenly rose in his mind. Let's give it a try. Zhuowen was extremely decisive. Since he had thought of it, he naturally wanted to give it a try. Then he continued to use the devouring curse to absorb the remaining primordial spirits of the immortal corpses. When all the primordial spirits of the immortal corpses were fused together, the size of the primordial spirit in Zhuowen's hand did not change. However, its aura made Zhuowen's expression change. The primordial spirit's aura was far beyond the scope of an earthly immortal. According to Zhuowen's estimation, the primordial spirit's aura was probably comparable to a peak earthly immortal. If it could be refined into a primordial spirit bomb, one could imagine how terrifying its power would be. Then let's begin the refinement. Zhuan took a deep breath. The primordial spirit's aura was extremely strong. It was definitely the strongest he had ever seen in his life. If it could be refined into a primordial spirit bomb, it would probably completely surpass the primordial spirit bomb refined by Jiang Zuomei's primordial spirit, and become his strongest trump card. Time gradually passed, and another 3 months passed. During these 3 months, Zhuan spent almost all of his attention on refining the primordial spirit bomb. There was no doubt that this primordial spirit was fused with the primordial spirits of hundreds of immortal corpses. Therefore, the process of refining the primordial spirit bomb became extremely difficult. The most difficult part came from the deep resentment of these primordial spirits. Zhuan spent most of his time refining these resentment. Therefore, he delayed for 3 months before finally refining the primordial spirit into a primordial spirit bomb. When the primordial spirit bomb was completely refined, Zhuan heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the primordial spirit bomb in his palm, and his eyes were full of passion. The aura that flowed out from the primordial spirit bomb made even Zhuan tremble. He could totally imagine the power that would be produced once the primordial spirit bomb was detonated. It was enough to shake the heavens and earth. He carefully put away the primordial spirit bomb. Now he named the only 2 primordial spirit bombs on him as the big primordial spirit bomb and the small primordial spirit bomb, to distinguish the 2 primordial spirit bombs. After Zhuan put away the primordial spirit bomb, the blood immortal suddenly ran over from the other side in a hurry. Her face was full of excitement. "Master, it's a success. The small blood disciple has succeeded." The blood immortal rushed to the front of Zhuan. She held a blood pill in her hand and handed it to Zhuan. She said with an expression of wanting to be praised, "Master, I finally succeeded in the blood substitution death method." Zhuan's eyes focused. He immediately looked at the blood pill in the blood immortal's hand carefully. He then held it in his hand and found that the surface of the blood pill was covered with dense blood patterns. These blood patterns were very complicated, like the veins of a human body. The moment the blood pill was in his hand, Zhuan could clearly feel that his heart was beating faster. This made Zhuan curious. He looked at the blood immortal and asked, "How do I use this blood pill?" The blood immortal grinned and said, "It's very simple. Master, you only need to drip a drop of your life essence blood on the blood pill. Then the blood pill will connect with your heart. If your body dies accidentally, then the blood pill can resurrect you. But you need to put the blood pill in a secret place, because if your body dies, your soul will be born from the blood pill. At that time, the blood pill's surging blood force will rebuild your body." "I see." Zhuan nodded. There was a hint of passion in his eyes. If the blood pill really had the effect of resurrecting a substitute, it would be an extremely incredible thing for him. After all, with the blood pill, it was equivalent to having an extra life. With his eyes flashing, Zhuan pointed between his eyebrows with his right hand and extracted a drop of life essence blood. Then, under his guidance, he dripped it into the blood pill. Suddenly, the surface of the blood pill emitted a blazing red light. Then, Zhuan found that after the blood pill absorbed the life essence blood, the meridians on the surface of the blood pill became clearer, as if they were the meridians of the human body. Moreover, these meridians were slowly beating. Moreover, Zhuan also began to have a very intimate feeling with the blood pill. It was as if the blood pill in front of him was his second life. Putting away the blood pill, Zhuan looked quite satisfied. Then he looked at the blood immortal and asked, "How many blood whales are left?" The blood immortal smiled and said, "There are 2 blood whales left. I failed 6 times to refine the blood pill. I succeeded on the 7th try." Zhuan nodded and said, "Then you can have the remaining 2 blood whales. This thing should have a great effect on you. I won't take it from you." Chapter 1729. Songji. After sending the blood immortal away, Zhuan waved his sleeve and called out Xiaohei. He asked in a low voice, "Xiaohei, who is the Songji you mentioned to Senior Shiji? Does he have anything to do with the Luoyan whale?" Xiaohei's eyes flickered. She sighed and said, "Songji is my master, who was known as the strongest man on the continent in antiquity times. Fuxi is my master's disciple. That's why Fuxi and I are so close. The Fuxi cauldron in your sea of consciousness was specially made by my master for Fuxi. That's why I was willing to follow you. Because the Fuxi cauldron chose you. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and he suddenly understood. He continued to ask, then you should tell me about the Luo Yin whale, right? From your conversation with Senior Shiji, it seems that the Luo Yin whale's hibernation has something to do with Songjia. At that moment, Zhuowen had truly begun to come into contact with the truth of the catastrophe from 10,000 years ago. However, the more he understood, the more confused he became. Layer after layer of fog covered him. At first, he knew that the catastrophe 10,000 years ago had something to do with the heavenly insect. But later, he knew that the heavenly insect was not the real source of the catastrophe. There was another mastermind behind it. Now the so-called Luo Yin whale and Songjia, the strongest man on the continent, were involved. Zhuowen was full of doubts. He knew that Songjia should be a key figure in the catastrophe. At the same time, Zhuowen thought of the white-haired head sealed in the broken Fang abyss. Who was the owner of the head? Was it also someone related to the catastrophe 10,000 years ago? The Luo Yin whale is the same as the heavenly insect. It's a horrible giant beast released by the mastermind behind the catastrophe. In other words, the Luo Yin whale is more horrible than the heavenly insect, because the Luo Yin whale could defeat genuine immortals, and even fight against divine transformation realm experts. You also know that there is a queen in the smoke whale. This queen has existed for a long time. She is like the brain of the smoke whale, and she is in charge of all kinds of actions of the smoke whale. Once, my master Songjia caught the first queen's weakness in advance, completely killed her, and put the smoke whale into an eternal sleep. However, later on, Master led several pinnacle experts of the continent to find the mastermind behind the scenes and fought with the mastermind in the void. As for the specific results of the battle, I wasn't qualified to participate at that time, so I don't know. All I know is that the entire heavenly armor continent has collapsed, broken into several plates. Many saints have fallen, and the immortal chi of the past has degenerated into the current vitality. The prosperous martial way has also completely declined. At this point, Xiao Hei's eyes were filled with sorrow. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He was getting more and more interested in the catastrophe that happened 10,000 years ago. However, there were too many mysteries behind it. Even now, he only knew the tip of the iceberg. Then do you know who the white-haired head in the seven-colored seal is? Zhuowen continued to ask. He faintly felt that the white-haired head was not simple. Perhaps it was a key figure from 10,000 years ago. Xiao Hei shook her head and said, I have never seen the white-haired head. I really don't know the identity of the white-haired head. As for the middle-aged man who subdued the white-haired head, I guess he should be the current divine master of the Chaos Temple. He should be a new genuine immortal in the past 10,000 years. Otherwise, I would have known him. The Chaos Temple existed 10,000 years ago. Its founder was my master Songjia. The origin of the heavenly worm is also sealed in the depths of the Chaos Temple. I think that in the Chaos Temple, there might be a handwritten record of my master. Perhaps the truth can be found in the Chaos Temple. Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard this, and he said in a low voice, Xiao Hei, if this Chaos Temple was really created by your master, then would you be able to move about unobstructed if you appeared in the Chaos Temple? After all, Xiao Hei waved her hand and interrupted Zhuowen. She said, don't mention this again. If the Chaos Temple learns of my identity, I'm afraid both of us will be in danger. Zhuowen's gaze became curious. He asked rather strangely, why do you say that? Xiao Hei's eyes flickered. She found it difficult to speak. However, Cheng Huang shot out from between Zhuowen's eyebrows and pointed at Xiao Hei. It laughed. It's all because this fellow committed too many sins. He offended many people in the Chaos Temple. If it weren't for Lord Songjia's name, he probably would have been chopped up and cooked. Old fox, no one will think you're mute if you don't say anything. Xiao Hei bared her teeth and glared at Cheng Huang in an extremely hostile manner. However, Cheng Huang did not care at all and continued, Although all the old friends of the Chaos Temple have died in the calamity 10,000 years ago, this fellow's name is still very famous in the Chaos Temple. If the people of the Chaos Temple learn about Xiaohei, they might really cook him. Old fox, I'm going to tear you apart today. Xiaohei roared out and immediately charged at Cheng Huang. The two of them immediately began fighting in the air. Zhuowen did not pay any attention to the fight between Xiaohei and Cheng Huang. Instead, he sank into his thoughts. It seemed that Xiaohei had committed many atrocities in the past, so it was impossible for him to enter the Chaos Temple through connections. He could only rely on the Battle of Gods now. If he really obtained first place in the Battle of Gods, it would be more than enough for him to enter the Chaos Temple. Back then, that middle-aged man said that the Battle of Gods would erupt within the next 5 years, so there's still plenty of time. I'll first learn the Ask the Buddha demon transformation that Senior Shiji imparted to me. Zhuowen had only been in the Shattered Nightmare Abyss for about a year and a half, so he planned to stay for another half a year before leaving. Time gradually passed, and another half a year went by. In the vast void of the Shattered Nightmare Abyss, a terrifying Buddhist light suddenly erupted above a fragment of land. This Buddhist light swept high into the sky and then sprinkled down, illuminating the earth. Above the Buddhist light, a gigantic ancient Buddha figure slowly appeared. The ancient Buddha figure squinted its eyes, and its right hand was pinched into an orchid shape. There was a light well behind its head that was thousands of feet long, and cryptic Buddhist chants could be heard. I asked the Buddha and say, sitting is Zen, walking is Zen, one flower is a world, one leaf is a Tathagata. Spring comes and flowers bloom, autumn comes and leaves fall. Boundless prajna, the heart is free, the body is silent, the movement is still, the body is natural. Zhuowen followed the ancient Buddha figure. His right hand pinched into an orchid shape, and he gently struck the void. Instantly, countless falling flowers fell from the sky. Beside the falling flowers were fallen leaves, and the leaves drifted along with the falling flowers. One flower is a world, one leaf is a Tathagata. Zhuowen murmured in a low voice. His right hand pinched and caught a falling flower. His eyes were filled with a misty look. His eyes penetrated the falling flower, as if he could see thousands of worlds and endless origins within the falling flower. Zhuowen flicked his finger, and the falling flower shot out like a dart. Wherever it passed, the surrounding void crumbled inch by inch, turning into fragments of nothingness. The might of this flower caused Zhuowen's eyes to flicker. He raised his head and stared at the ancient Buddha's illusory figure that sat upright in the sky, surrounded by falling flowers and leaves, and wild joy emerged in his heart. So this is the true meaning of Ask the Buddha. This celestial art is worthy of being the fighting Buddha demon saint's strongest celestial art. It actually has such a terrifying power. Zhuowen murmured in a low voice. He rolled up his sleeve, and the ancient Buddha figure slowly dissipated. The falling flowers and leaves also disappeared in the void as if they were invisible. In the past 6 months, Zhuowen had been comprehending the celestial art Ask the Buddha demon transformation. After using Ask the Buddha today, even Zhuowen was a little surprised by its power. Although Zhuowen was a half-immortal, the 3 celestial arts that he possessed, Finger of the Slaughtering Underworld Lone Peak, and Ask the Buddha demon transformation, were not ordinary celestial arts. With just the 3 celestial arts, Zhuowen's original body might not be able to kill an earthly immortal initial stage existence. At most, they could only suppress him. However, if Zhuowen was able to merge his mind-power doppelganger, which possessed the devouring curse, with his holy body, Zhuowen's combat prowess would be pushed to another level. In that state, Zhuowen could fight an earthly immortal initial stage expert. He even had a high chance of defeating an earthly immortal initial stage expert. The divine body has stayed in the 4th forbidden area of the 19th mountain for a long time. He should be about to completely comprehend the laws of the 4th forbidden area. Speaking of this, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a hint of a blazing color. He was very clear that if the divine body completely comprehended the laws of the 4th forbidden area, then the number of laws in his body would reach 10. And with 10 laws in his body, Zhuowen would have the opportunity to comprehend Tao intent. Of course, Whether he could comprehend Dao intent at that time would depend on his comprehension ability. It's time to leave this place. Zhuowen laughed and took a step forward. In an instant, he had disappeared thousands of miles away. If someone saw Zhuowen's current state, they would definitely cry out. This was because Zhuowen was using teleportation, which only earthly immortals could do. However, Zhuowen's cultivation had not yet reached the earthly immortal stage, yet he could use teleportation. Without a doubt, this was a heaven-defying feat. The reason why Zhuowen could master teleportation was naturally not because he comprehended it himself. Instead, it was because of the divine ability bestowed upon him by Shurji's blood essence. Shurji was the famous fighting Buddha demon sage in antiquity times. One could imagine how precious his blood essence was. Moreover, this blood essence was directly attached to Zhuowen's Dantian. Therefore, it was not surprising that Zhuowen could use the divine ability of teleportation. Of course, if Zhuowen used his thunder wings, his speed would only be enhanced on the basis of teleportation. It would far exceed the speed of an ordinary earthly immortal. Although it would not be comparable to the great teleportation of a celestial immortal, it was very close. Soon, Zhuowen swept out of the endless void of the shattered elephant abyss and arrived at the original entrance of the passage. Zhuowen raised his head and gazed at the countless black winds of shattered elephant abyss in the sky. The corners of his mouth were full of smiles. When he first entered the shattered elephant abyss, he had to rely on the Azure Dragon Hall to resist the black winds of annihilation. But now, he could rush out of the shattered elephant abyss without relying on the Azure Dragon Hall. Zhuowen took a step forward. The 100,000 underworld water droplets in his body turned into 10 underworld death needles. Then, like a bolt of lightning, he suddenly swept upward. Chapter 1730. By Clan Bang. 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 The sound of the yellow spring death needles colliding with the black wind of annihilation resounded throughout the abyss. It was like the sound of an empty valley, but it actually contained a certain rhythm. Swoosh. When Zhuowen took the final step, and stepped onto the cliff of the shattered nightmare abyss, the black wind of annihilation behind him stopped and hid in the depths of the abyss. Zhuowen took a deep breath as excitement filled his eyes. He had stayed in the shattered nightmare abyss for 2 years. During these 2 years, many things had happened in the shattered nightmare abyss, giving Zhuowen a feeling of being in a different world. Zhuowen turned around and quietly stared at the bottom of the shattered nightmare abyss. He could not help but recall the scene 2 years ago when he was chased by Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei into this place. If he encountered Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei again now, it would be very difficult for them to kill him even if he did not reveal his trump card. Of course, the two of them had already been killed by Zhuowen. Let's go to the Green Lotus Mansion first. I wonder if Big Brother Hantian and Woody are still there? I also need to inquire about the situation of the Battle of Gods. Of course, if possible, the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan will have to take revenge. Zhuowen took a step forward and teleported away. His eyes were filled with coldness. The Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan had forced him into such a miserable state back then. Zhuowen would naturally take revenge for this debt. The shattered nightmare abyss was quite far from the Green Lotus Mansion. Back then, he had to flee for half a month before he could reach the shattered nightmare abyss from the Wind and Thunder Mansion. However, this time, Zhuowen's speed was slightly faster than before. Coupled with the fact that the Green Lotus Mansion was closer to the Wind and Thunder Mansion, Zhuowen only spent 7 days to reach the Green Lotus Mansion's territory. On a huge cliff, 3 figures were flashing about in a rather miserable state. The 3 of them were 2 men and a woman. One of the men was rather young, while the other was middle-aged. As for the only woman among the 3, she didn't appear to be very old either. She was very pretty, and at this moment, her eyes were filled with anxiety. Behind the 3 of them, numerous black shadows rushed over. Their speed was extremely fast, and their shadows were indistinct. It looked rather strange. Whoosh. The moment the 3 of them reached the edge of the cliff, the 3 of them suddenly stopped. This was because on the other side of the cliff, there was actually another shadowy figure. These figures were dressed in black robes, and had veils covering their faces. They stared at the three of them with sharp eyes. Just as these black-clothed men slowly surrounded the three of them and slowly drew closer, a ripple suddenly appeared in the air above the cliff. Soon after, a figure slowly walked out. This person was none other than Zhuowen, who was rushing to the Green Lotus Mansion. At this moment, he also noticed that the atmosphere on the cliff was not right. He looked around at the shadows of the black-clothed men, and the three people who were surrounded. With a single glance, he guessed the current situation. However, he was too lazy to care about this matter. After all, he was neither related nor related to those three people. Even if he didn't care about their cultivation, he didn't want to meddle in their business. Teleportation. The gaze of the person in the lead of this group of black-clothed figures instantly shook when he saw Zhuowen flash up into the sky above the cliff. The fluctuation that appeared abruptly from Zhuowen was extremely familiar to this person, because he'd once had the fortune to see an earthly immortal realm expert utilize teleportation, and the fluctuation was practically exactly similar to this person. Senior brother. Save me. These people were sent by the Green Lotus Mansion's Mansion Master to encircle our Bai clan's only profound Saint Master. You can't sit idly by. Among the three people who were originally on the path of no return, a trace of determination appeared in the eyes of the young man. He couldn't help but shout at Zhuowen. This person is also a member of the Bai clan? When did such a terrifying expert appear in the Bai clan? The leader of the black-clothed men widened his eyes as he knew that things were bad. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and coldly stared at the young man, causing the latter to involuntarily tremble. However, his gaze was extremely stubborn. He knew that he could die, but the Arcana Master he was escorting this time couldn't die. Once the Arcana Master died, their Bai clan would really collapse. That was why he had come up with this plan. The Bai clan. Zhuowen withdrew his gaze and muttered in a low voice. The leader of the black-clothed men glanced at Zhuowen, and then at the young man. He seemed to have understood something and hurriedly cupped his hands respectfully at Zhuowen. Sir, do you know these three people? At this moment, the young man and the other two immediately became nervous. Earlier, the young man was just trying his luck. He expected that the strength of this young man who suddenly appeared wasn't weak. If this person was willing to help them, they would be saved. However, the leader of the black-clothed men was smart. He actually didn't act rashly and instead asked in advance. This naturally made the young man, who was hoping for a fluke, feel a trace of nervousness. Scram. Zhuowen didn't even look at the leader of the black-clothed men as he softly spat out these words. The sound wave was strengthened by celestial core power and surged out layer by layer. The moment the leader of the black-clothed men came into contact with the sound wave, his face suddenly became as pale as snow. Then he spat out a mouthful of bright red blood and couldn't help but stagger back. Not only the leader of the black-clothed men, but the black-clothed men behind him were also in a worse state. Some of the weaker ones directly exploded into clouds of blood mist under the sound wave, and were actually on the verge of death. Looking at this scene, the young man and the other two gasped. The strength of this group of black-clothed men was extraordinary. They were all in the Heaven Saint realm. Among them, the leader of the black-clothed men was even more powerful. He had reached the heaven-defying Saint realm, and could be regarded as an elite expert of the Green Lotus Mansion. However, now, the young man in front of him had spat out a mouthful of blood and directly sent him flying backwards. He was in an extremely sorry state. What kind of strength did he need to achieve this? At this moment, the young man and the other two looked at Zhuowen with eyes full of awe. At this moment, Zhuowen's figure was rapidly enlarging in the eyes of the three people, like a vast and boundless mountain. The leader of the black-clothed men stood up awkwardly and immediately cupped his hands at Zhuowen and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Senior, please don't be angry. We're going to scram now." With that, the leader of the black-clothed men hurriedly shouted at the people behind him, "Why aren't you scramming? What are you waiting for?" The leader of the black-clothed men was very efficient. In a short while, all the black-clothed men were dismissed. The leader of the black-clothed men bowed respectfully at Zhuowen, and then slowly left the place. After the leader of the black-clothed men left, Zhuowen slowly landed in front of the young man and stared coldly at him. The young man directly knelt on the ground and said in a trembling voice, "My lord, I was forced by the situation just now. Please forgive me." The middle-aged man and the young woman also knelt on the ground and hurriedly pleaded on behalf of the young man. Zhuowen's eyes flickered and said, "The three of you are members of the Green Lotus Mansions by clan? Why were those black-clothed men chasing after you?" Seeing that Zhuowen had no intention of blaming them, and was instead asking about them, the young man hurriedly said, "Yes, the three of us are indeed members of the Bai clan. As for those black-clothed men chasing after us, it was mainly to kill Bai Feng." With that, the young man looked at the woman beside him and continued, "Bai Feng is the strongest arcanist in our Bai clan. Moreover, she just broke through to the profound Saint Master level not long ago. These people actually came to snatch Bai Feng away for the sake of the upcoming Battle of the Gods." Battle of the Gods. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and couldn't help but ask, "Is there a connection between arcanists and the Battle of the Gods?" The young man looked at Zhuowen in surprise and said, "My lord, don't you know the rules of the Battle of the Gods?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered and he said indifferently, "I just came out of seclusion, so I don't know much about the Battle of the Gods." The young man revealed a look of understanding and said rather eagerly, "If my lord doesn't know, then let me explain it to you." Zhuowen nodded. The young man naturally wouldn't let go of such an opportunity to curry favor, and slowly explained the rules of the Battle of the Gods. After hearing that, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a trace of understanding. The Battle of the Gods was held by the Primal Chaos Temple, and it was said that it was to select the 99 Primal Chaos War Gods. It was said that this Battle of the Gods involved the ancient battlefield. Of course, this was only a rumor, and whether or not it could be believed was another matter. The preliminary selection of the Battle of the Gods was divided into 9 regions. And these 9 regions were the 9 surrounding prefectures led by the 9 Saint Talisman clans. It was said that only 100 people would be selected from each region. There were 11 prefectures in one region, and there were many powerful geniuses and experts in each prefecture. There were so many of them that they were absolutely dazzling. However, only 100 of them were selected to participate in the Battle of the Gods. The elimination rate was definitely very high. The region where the Green Lotus Prefecture was located was the Wind and Thunder Clan's responsibility. Due to Zhuowen causing havoc in the Wind and Thunder Clan and the Ice and Fire Clan's coercion, the Wind and Thunder Clan's Wind and Thunder City could be said to be in a mess. In order to rebuild the Wind and Thunder City, the Wind and Thunder Clan urgently gathered arcanists in the 11 prefectures they were in charge of. It was said that as long as someone could provide a profound Saint Master to enter the Wind and Thunder Clan, the Wind and Thunder Clan would grant one of the 100 spots to the force that provided the profound Saint Master. There were no profound Saint Masters in the Green Lotus Prefecture, and the Green Lotus Prefecture's Mansion Master originally didn't intend to take this spot. However, Bai Feng of the Bai clan in the Green Lotus Prefecture had coincidentally broken through to the profound Saint Master level and caused a big commotion in the Green Lotus Prefecture. Therefore, the Green Lotus Prefecture's Mansion Master planned to snatch Bai Feng and send her to the Wind and Thunder Clan in exchange for the spot. Although the Bai clan had a high status in the Green Lotus Prefecture because of the Bai Feng, the Bai clan's status plummeted after the disappearance of the Bai Feng. Now the Bai clan was no longer glorious. In order to prevent Bai Feng from being taken by the Green Lotus Prefecture, the Bai clan secretly sent her away. However, they didn't expect that the black-clothed men sent by the Green Lotus Prefecture would catch up with them. Therefore, Zhuowen encountered Bai Feng and the other 2. "I see. Now take me back to the Bai clan. With me around, I'd like to see if the Green Lotus Prefecture still dares to touch your Bai clan," Zhuowen said indifferently. As soon as these words came out, the young man and the other 2 revealed an unprecedented joy. Zhuowen's words meant that he intended to support them. Chapter 1731. 5 Animals Seal. "My lord, our Bai clan is in Tianluan City," Bai Lin said to Zhuowen as he stood on a high slope and pointed at the huge city in front of them. Zhuowen walked over slowly with Bai Feng and Bai Lu. He stared at the huge city in front of him and his eyes lit up. The reason he came to the Bai clan was mainly because of Bai Feng. Of course, it was also because of Lu Hantian and Wu Dai. Along the way, Zhuowen learned the names of the three people. The young man was called Bai Lin, the woman was called Bai Feng, and the silent middle-aged man was called Bai Lu. The three of them had a high status in the Bai clan. Zhuowen also heard from Bai Lin that Lu Hantian and Wu Dai had been staying in the Bai clan, and had become the Bai clan's foreign officials. Due to their strength, they were treated well in the Bai clan. Something's not right. Why is Tianluan City so quiet today? Bai Feng frowned as she sensed that something was wrong. Zhuo Wen's eyes were like torches as he stretched out his right hand. Instantly, 1,000 yellow spring water droplets flew out from his body and formed a yellow spring eye. Under Zhuo Wen's command, the yellow spring eye flew into Tianluan City at an extremely fast speed. After a while, Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, Tianluan City is under someone's control. It seems like it's the Green Lotus Mansion Master's doing. Bai Lin, Bai Feng, and Bai Lu's expressions changed slightly. Bai Lin said in a panic, "What should we do now? The Green Lotus Mansion is much more powerful than our Bai clan. Break in." Zhuo Wen said indifferently with an unquestionable tone. Bai Lin and the other two were shocked. Bai Lu, who had been silent, suddenly said, "My lord, the Green Lotus Mansion Master is an expert in the early earthly immortal realm. He's not someone to be trifled with. Moreover, there are many experts in the Green Lotus Mansion. I've said it before. Break in." Zhuo Wen interrupted Bai Lu. He stomped his right foot and turned into a long rainbow as he flew toward Tianluan City. "Let's follow them." Bai Lin and Bai Feng did not say anything as they followed closely behind Zhuo Wen. Bai Lu hesitated for a moment before sighing softly and following closely behind. At this moment, Tianluan City was extremely quiet. The large streets and small alleys within it were filled with armored soldiers. The doors of the houses on both sides of the streets were tightly shut. Occasionally, some windows would be quietly opened, but they were quickly closed. The Bai family was located in a large building complex in the northernmost part of Tianluan City. At this moment, the Bai family was surrounded by a large number of soldiers. However, there was an invisible restriction set up around the Bai family, blocking the soldiers outside. Outside the restriction, a middle-aged man in white armor hovered in the air. He stared quietly at the Bai family on the other side of the restriction and said coldly, "I'm the general of the Green Lotus Mansion, Huang Huaqing. Bai family, you've released Bai Feng without permission and defied the Green Lotus Mansion. This is a serious crime. If you surrender now, you'll be given a lighter sentence. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." In the huge martial arts practice field of the Bai family, the patriarch of the Bai family led a group of higher-ups as they stared solemnly at the soldiers guarding outside. They did not expect things to develop to this point. "Patriarch, you should have handed Bai Feng over. Otherwise, you wouldn't have angered the Green Lotus Mansion. How can we resist the current situation?" "That's right. Looking at the current situation, our Bai clan is at its end." Behind the patriarch of the Bai family, Bai Qing, many of the higher-ups were filled with despair and resentment. They blamed Bai Qing for his decision. "Humph. Even if this didn't happen, do you think that the Green Lotus Mansion would let our Bai family off? The Green Lotus Mansion has been coveting our Bai family's primordial chaos immortal art for a long time. After cultivating the primordial chaos immortal art, you don't need to combine your mental energy with your origin energy to cultivate immortal energy and easily break through to the profound Saint Master realm. In the past, the Green Lotus Mansion did not dare to act recklessly because of Bai Feng. But now Bai Feng has gone missing. Even if Bai Feng's matter did not happen, the Green Lotus Mansion would still come for us. After all, a man's wealth is his own ruin." Bai Qing looked around. All the higher-ups who met his gaze could not help but lower their heads. "It's a pity that our Bai family only has the first half of the immortal origin technique. The second half is with Bai Feng. If we had the complete immortal origin technique, our Bai family would be able to produce a heavenly Saint Master. With the status of a heavenly Saint Master, the Primal Chaos Temple would definitely pay attention to us. Even if the Green Lotus Mansion's mansion master's cultivation has reached the early Earth immortal realm, he wouldn't dare to touch our Bai family. One of the higher-ups sighed. In the Central Plains, the status of an arcanist was much higher than that of a warrior. In particular, profound Saint Masters were even rarer. An ordinary profound Saint Master's status was comparable to a heavenly Saint Master, and heavenly Saint Masters were even rarer. Other than the Primal Chaos Temple, it was basically impossible to find a heavenly Saint Master anywhere else in the Central Plains. However, once a heavenly Saint Master appeared, regardless of whether they joined the Primal Chaos Temple or not, they would be protected by the Primal Chaos Temple. At this point, Bai Qing suddenly cupped his hands and apologized to the two figures on the side. Honored guest Lu, honored guest Wu, this is a private matter of my Bai family. I'm really sorry for involving you too. If Zhuowen was here, he would definitely recognize these two figures. Weren't they Lu Hantian and Wu Dai, whom Zhuowen was looking for? Lu Hantian quickly cupped his hands and said, "What are you saying, Patriarch Bai? All these years, you've personally used the resources of the Patriarch to support our cultivation. If I were to run away at this juncture, would I still be human?" Brother Hantian is right. Now the first thing we need to do is to face Huang Huaqing. Wu Dai also nodded. At this moment, Huang Huaqing, who was wearing his feathered armor outside, saw that no one was answering him. He smiled coldly and said, "If that's the case, then don't blame me for being impolite. This time the Patriarch has asked me to bring the 5 animals seal. A mere profound Saint Master's seal is really insignificant." With that, Huang Huaqing flicked his finger and took out a large seal from his spirit ring. A large amount of green qi emerged from the seal. The green qi transformed into the shapes of tigers, deer, bears, apes, and birds. A surging pressure swept out from the seal. The 5 animals seal of the Green Lotus Mansion? I didn't think that Xuehui would give this to you. The moment Huang Huaqing took out the 5 animals seal, Bai Qing and the others' faces turned ugly. The 5 animals seal was an earthly immortal saint artifact. They didn't think that Xuehui would really put in a lot of effort to destroy their Bai family. Huang Huaqing smiled coldly and looked down at Bai Qing and the others inside the seal. His eyes were full of disdain. Huang Huaqing blew out a breath of air from his mouth. Instantly, the green gas that lingered on the 5-bird seal swept out and transformed into 5 huge animal forms: tiger, deer, bear, ape, and bird. Soon after, they all rushed downwards. Bang! 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 As soon as the 5 animal seal appeared, Huang Huaqing pressed down with his right hand. The seal that carried the green qi immediately blasted on the surface of the seal. Then a terrifying tremor came from the seal and it collapsed. Bai Qing and the other higher-ups, who were in charge of the seal, spat out a mouthful of blood. Their faces were all pale. "Haha, your Bai family will end here." Huang Huaqing held the 5-animal seal in his right hand and stretched out his left hand. Suddenly, a surging saint power burst out and transformed into a huge palm. It wanted to completely envelop Bai Qing and the others. Bai Qing and the others' faces changed slightly. They all used their saint power to block Huang Huaqing's palm. However, before the saint energy palm could land, it froze in midair and crumbled. Huang Huaqing, who had a smug smile on his face, had a slight change in his expression. He snorted and retreated. Whoosh! The instant Huang Huaqing retreated, his pupils constricted as he saw a long yellow needle shoot out from the crumbling palm. The needle was extremely fast and was heading straight for his vitals. Huang Huaqing shouted angrily. He waved his right hand and held the 5-animal seal in front of him. Suddenly, the green qi on the 5-animal seal surged and transformed into the shapes of tigers, deer, bears, apes, and birds. They wanted to block the strange long yellow needle. Whoosh! Whoosh! However, very quickly, Huang Huaqing's pupils shrank as he discovered that after the yellow long needle, there were actually 9 identical long needles that flew out. The 10 long needles were like 10 long rainbows. In an instant, the 5 animal shapes formed by the 5 animals seal were shattered. How is this possible? Huang Huaqing exclaimed. He had no choice but to lift the 5 animals seal to meet the 10 long needles. After all, The 5 animals seal was an earthly god's sacred artifact. When the 10 long needles landed on the 5 animals seal, they did not shatter it. Instead, they were blocked. Huang Huaqing heaved a sigh of relief. However, he was extremely shocked. The 10 long needles that had mysteriously appeared were terrifying. He did not know where the owner of the long needles was. It's such a waste for an earthly god's sacred artifact to be in your hands. An indifferent voice was heard. Then 2 blazing suns suddenly rose behind Huang Huaqing. Within the 2 blazing suns, there were 2 long swords. The 2 long swords were extremely fast. In an instant, they blocked the 10 long needles. Suddenly, the huge force produced caused the 5 animals seal in Huang Huaqing's hands to fall to the ground. This is also an earthly god's sacred artifact. Huang Huaqing stared at the 2 long swords that were rushing towards him. He could clearly feel the aura of an earthly god's sacred artifact. Although it was a little incomplete, it was indeed the aura of an earthly god's sacred artifact. The moment the 5-bird seal left his hand, Huang Huaqing's reaction speed was also extremely fast. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood mist. Then the blood mist quickly entered his body. Then he directly disappeared on the spot and teleported toward the 5-bird seal that had left his hand. However, the moment he got close to the 5 animals seal, a huge lone mountain came crashing down from the sky and smashed heavily on Huang Huaqing's body. The lone mountain was 50,000 feet tall. When it came crashing down, the surrounding space was shattered into pieces. Chapter 1732. Shuihui. The lone peak gradually dissipated. Soon after, Huang Huaqing turned into a dried corpse without any signs of life. On the other hand, Zhuowen swiftly collected the 5-bird seal and Huang Huaqing's spirit ring. The reason why Zhuowen could kill Huang Huaqing so easily was mainly because Zhuowen's strength was no longer the same as before. Moreover, he had the ability to teleport, and Huang Huaqing was unable to unleash the full power of the 5-bird seal. Therefore, Zhuowen could kill Huang Huaqing so easily. Speaking of which, Huang Huaqing's arrogance was also a factor. After all, Huang Huaqing was too confident. He placed all his attention on the Bai clan and did not expect someone to attack him from behind. It was because of these factors that Zhuowen could kill him so easily. If Zhuowen faced Huang Huaqing, who had the 5-bird seal head-on, he might be able to defeat him, but it would definitely take a lot of effort. The upper echelons of the Bai clan stared blankly at this scene. They did not even have time to react. Huang Huaqing was killed in an instant, and before he died he did not even see the true appearance of his murderer. So terrifying, so strong. The upper echelons of the Bai clan, led by Bai Qing, trembled when they regained their senses. Their lips trembled, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. Lu Hantian and Wu Dai's eyes lit up because they felt a familiar aura from the attack just now. Whoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air rang out as 4 rainbows arrived in an instant. 4 figures appeared above the Bai clan. The person in the lead was a young man in a black robe. The aura of this young man was faintly discernible, but his eyes were as bright as the moon, making it difficult for others to look at him directly. When the upper echelons of the Bai clan saw this young man, they all trembled, especially Bai Qing. He felt it the most. Although this young man's aura seemed weak, when he sensed it carefully, he could faintly feel that this young man possessed a terrifying power that made one's heart palpitate. Bai Feng, Bai Lu, Bai Lin? Why did the 3 of you come back? Bai Qing's pupils shrank as he looked at the 3 people behind Zhuowen. He could not help but berate them. Bai Lin and the other 2 were clearly afraid of Bai Qing. They shrunk their necks and did not dare to utter a single word. Just as Bai Qing was about to reprimand him again, Zhuowen said, "Patriarch Bai, the troops in the Green Lotus Mansion haven't been dispersed yet. This is the most important thing to deal with right now. Kill." At this moment, the many soldiers surrounding the Bai family naturally woke up from the shock of Huang Huaqing's death. Most of them were shocked and felt fear. However, at the same time, their eyes were filled with anger. The fact that their general had died in front of them was an absolute humiliation to them. Therefore, these soldiers took advantage of the fact that they outnumbered Zhuowen and the Bai family. It seems that the death of a general is not enough to intimidate them. Zhuowen's eyes flashed with coldness. With a wave of his sleeve, the 10 Yellow Springs death needles dispersed into 100,000 Yellow Springs water droplets. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 100,000 Yellow Springs water droplets were like streaks of yellow lightning. They streaked across the sky and rustled towards the many soldiers who were charging towards them. Although a single Yellow Springs water droplet was not enough to kill a soldier, with so many Yellow Springs water droplets combined, the soldiers who charged towards them basically died one by one, two by two. This one-sided massacre did not last for long. The soldiers at the back were finally terrified and fled in all directions. Zhuowen did not chase after the fleeing soldiers. Instead, he swept his sleeve and brought Bai Lin and the other two into the courtyard of the Bai family. Zhuowen walked straight towards Lu Hantian and Wu Dai. He stood in front of them and quietly looked at them. Suddenly he smiled and said, "Big brother Lu Hantian, Wu Dai, long time no see." Lu Hantian and Wu Dai were both excited. Lu Hantian took a step forward and placed his hands heavily on Zhuowen's shoulders. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "You little brat. I knew you were lucky. Big brother Zhuo, Wu Dai finally gets to see you again." Wu Dai was also crying tears of joy. Long before Wu Dai became a saint, Zhuowen had already dissolved their master-servant relationship. Therefore, Wu Dai no longer addressed Zhuowen as Big Brother Zhuo, instead of Master. Haha, so it's an old acquaintance of Honored Guest Elder Hantian and Wu Dai. Honored Guest Elder Hantian, why don't you introduce this brother to us? Seeing Zhuowen, Lu Hantian and Wu Dai's actions, Bai Qing and the other higher-ups were all delighted. Bai Qing in particular, laughed and said to Lu Hantian and Wu Dai. Lu Hantian came back to his senses and said rather calmly, "Patriarch Bai, this is a good brother of mine. His name is Longwen. Like us, he also came from the Eastern lands." He also came from the Eastern lands? Bai Qing and the others' expressions changed slightly. They could not help but seriously size up Zhuowen. There was no doubt that the strength Zhuowen displayed just now was extremely terrifying. He was able to kill Huang Huaqing, who had the 5-bird seal, with a flip of his hand. He was at least an early Earth immortal. Such a person could be regarded as a peerless expert in the Central region. However, this person actually came from the Eastern lands, which was much more sparse than the Central region. This was somewhat inconceivable. Of course, this also caused Bai Qing to value Zhuowen even more. They knew that this young man's future achievements would definitely be extraordinary. Of course, the strength that this young man had displayed was something that they could only hope to catch up to. Zhuowen took a deep look at Lu Hantian. When Lu Hantian did not mention his name, Zhuowen had already guessed it. "Zhuowen, your real name is now well known in the Central region. Moreover, the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan have joined forces to arrest you in the Central region. You have to be careful." Lu Hantian transmitted his voice to Zhuowen. Hearing this, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. From the fact that the Wind and Thunder clan and the Ice and Fire clan had joined forces to arrest him, it could be seen that these two clans should have known about the deaths of Jiang Zuomei and Lei Qingtian. "Brother Hantian, I know about this. Also, I have been trapped in the Shattered Nightmare Abyss for the past 2 years. Later, let's find a place to talk about what happened in the Central region." Zhuowen transmitted his voice back. "So your name is Longwen. With your strength and cultivation, you are qualified to be on the same level as me. I am Bai Qing, the patriarch of the Bai clan. These are the higher-ups of the Bai clan." Bai Qing introduced the higher-ups of the Bai clan to Zhuowen in a rather solicitous manner. However, Zhuowen was not interested in this and just casually responded. Bai Qing observed Zhuowen's expression. Naturally, he could tell that Zhuowen was not interested in this. He quickly said, "Brother Longwen must be tired from the long journey. Bai Feng, choose the best room and bring Brother Longwen there." Rumble. However, as soon as Bai Qing finished speaking, a terrifying muffled thunder resounded in the sky above Tianluan City. In the distance, a dense dark cloud suddenly swept over at a speed that was too fast for one to cover one's ears. In the depths of the dark cloud, extremely terrifying and intense lightning flashed, as if there were countless lightning serpents. Zhuowen slowly raised his head. His eyes were like torches as he stared at the dark cloud. A cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. The dark cloud was extremely fast. In an instant, it swept over the sky above Tianluan City. For a moment, wind and thunder roared, causing many cultivators in Tianluan City to shut their doors and not dare to come out. They could only hide in their own rooms and secretly watch. Countless lightning bolts were entwined in the dark cloud. These lightning bolts were green in color, and finally condensed into a figure. This person wore a green robe and had shoulder-length hair. There was a green lightning pattern engraved between his eyebrows. The green-robed man slowly lowered his head. Green lightning flashed in his eyes. He looked down at Zhuowen and said in a deep voice, "The 5-animal seal is in your hands? Did you also kill Huang Huaqing?" "It's the Green Lotus Mansion's mansion master, Xuehui. Damn it, this Xuehui is so shameless. He came to my Bai clan personally. This is too much." The veins on Bai Qing's forehead bulged, and his face was extremely ugly. The higher-ups of the Bai clan all looked worried. Although Zhuowen was there, Xuehui was not to be trifled with. After all, Xuehui's cultivation was at the early stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. His strength was extraordinary. Zhuowen might not be able to defeat Xuehui. Zhuowen quietly stared at Xuehui with a strange look in his eyes. The Green Lotus Mansion's mansion master, Xuehui, was much stronger than Xue Hentian, the Blood Refining Mansion's mansion master. He was at the early stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. As for Xue Hentian, the Blood Refining Mansion's mansion master, he was only extremely close to the half-immortal realm. However, Zhuowen also knew that the real mansion master of the Blood Refining Mansion was actually the Nine Suns Heaven Lord. The Nine Suns Heaven Lord was able to refine an earthly immortal sacred artifact like the Nine Suns Dao Sword. It was obvious that he had the strength of an earthly immortal realm expert. However, Xue Hentian had taken advantage of him. Of course, not all of the mansion masters of the 99 mansions had the strength of an earthly immortal realm expert. After all, there was still a huge gap between the mansions. The Green Lotus Mansion's mansion master was considered one of the top experts in the 99 mansions. His strength had reached the early stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. Most of the mansion masters were at the half-immortal realm. Moreover, it was extremely rare for a mansion master to possess an earthly immortal sacred artifact. Zhuowen raised his head indifferently and said, "I killed him. So what? Hand over the 5-animal seal, and I'll spare your life." Xuehui stood under the dark clouds and looked down at Zhuowen indifferently. His eyes were full of arrogance and disdain. Perhaps others might not be able to sense Zhuowen's aura, but Xuehui could tell that the young man in front of him was only a half-immortal realm expert. There was a huge gap between their cultivation and the early stage of the Earth Immortal Realm. Of course, Xuehui was surprised that Huang Qinghua had died in the hands of this half-immortal realm young man despite holding the 5-animal seal that he had given to him. Zhuowen flicked his right hand and took out the 5-animal seal that was filled with green energy. He held it in his hand and looked at Xuehui provocatively. He said, "If you want this 5-animal seal, just come and take it. Why are you dawdling over there?" Xuehui narrowed his eyes and sneered. "A mere half-immortal realm expert dares to be so arrogant. I really don't know who gave you such courage. Since you want me to take it by force, I won't hold back." Chapter 1733. Azure Dragon Bead Bai Qing and the other members of the Bai clan were unable to see through Zhuowen's exact cultivation, due to the restriction of their cultivation. They only felt that Zhuowen's aura was extremely vast, and was no weaker than an earthly immortal, so they mistook Zhuowen for an earthly immortal. However, Xuehui was different. He was a true earthly immortal, so he naturally saw through Zhuowen's cultivation with a single glance. He was merely a half-immortal. Of course, Xuehui was not a careless person. He clearly knew that since Zhuowen was able to seize the 5-bird seal from Huang Huaqing, it proved that this person was not an ordinary half-immortal. However, a half-immortal was still a half-immortal, and there was still a huge gap between them and an earthly immortal. Therefore, although Xuehui was rather cautious, there was still a trace of disdain and contempt in his eyes. Moreover, he was not afraid that Zhuowen possessed the 5-bird seal, because the five-bird seal was imprinted by him. Without his permission, it was impossible for others to use it. Of course, an earthly immortal expert with a higher cultivation than him could forcefully erase the imprint in the five-bird seal. However, Zhuowen was definitely not one of them. At this moment, Zhuowen stood silently. He stared at the rapidly descending green lightning, and Xuehui, who stood proudly in the sky. His eyes were filled with calmness. After so many years, Zhuowen once again encountered an earthly immortal expert, but his heart was actually filled with a tranquil calmness. When he seized the five-bird seal, he had already noticed the imprint in it. Although his strength was not bad, his cultivation had not reached the earthly immortal realm. The imprint of an earthly immortal was imprinted on it, so it was basically very difficult for him to erase it. Rumble. The green lightning was extremely fast, and it suddenly blasted above Zhuowen's head. Immediately, countless green lightning threads exploded, and countless lightning radiances spread out in the surroundings. It was like a green lightning prison that instantly submerged Zhuowen. Immediately, a terrifying tremor rose within the area where the Bai clan was located. Soon after, countless cracks began to appear on the ground. The ground cracked apart and countless green lightning threads followed along the cracks and instantly covered the cracks on the ground. The glaring green light was exceptionally beautiful. The expression of Bai Qing and the rest changed greatly, and they led the crowd to retreat repeatedly. Bai Qing's eyes. It's over. It seems that our Bai clan's luck art. Bai Qing was not the only one. The other higher-ups of the Bai family were also frowning in despair. Boom. However, the trembling did not last for long. At this moment, the cyan lightning prison formed by the cyan lightning that came crashing down suddenly collapsed with a crackling sound. A slender figure slowly walked out from the countless lightning threads, and his body was surrounded by the yellow spring waterfall formed by 100,000 yellow spring water droplets. The moment the figure appeared, Bai Qing and the rest's eyes lit up, and a trace of anticipation rose in their hearts. Is this the strength of an earthly immortal? Zhuowen slowly raised his head, and the yellow spring waterfall around him collapsed, turning into 10 yellow spring death needles. He stared indifferently at Xuehui in the sky. Xuehui's aura was much weaker than Lei Qingtian's and Jiang Zuomei's. Zhuowen knew that Xuehui should only be at the early stage of the earthly immortal realm, while Lei Qingtian and Jiang Zuomei should be at the late stage of the earthly immortal realm. Even though there's a big gap between us, I know that I can now fight against an early-stage earthly immortal realm expert. Perhaps I can defeat Xuehui without relying on any trump cards. Zhuowen muttered to himself, and a surge of fighting spirit rose in his body. This fighting spirit was too terrifying, and it soared into the sky, dispersing the terrifying dark clouds brought by Xuehui. Xuehui revealed a solemn expression when he sensed the battle intent that erupted from Zhuowen, and he said coldly, "Not bad indeed. You were actually able to receive one of my bolts of lightning. However, let me see if you can receive this move or not." As he spoke, Xuehui pointed his right hand to the sky and said, "Celestial skill, green dragon pearl." Boom. In an instant, the originally scattered dark clouds once again gathered together. Immediately, countless green thunderbolts surged and churned deep within the dark clouds. Immediately, they agglomerated into an enormous green dragon. As soon as the dragon was formed, it broke through the dark clouds, and with a whistling sound, it swooped down. The dragon opened its huge mouth, and a huge green bead was brewing in the dragon's mouth. On the surface of the green bead, there were countless rolling lightning bolts, and it was as if it contained the origin of lightning. The huge dragon opened its mouth and spat out the green bead. It was extremely fast, and it quickly swept toward Zhuowen. Wherever it passed, countless green lightning bolts raged, and the space collapsed, forming a terrifying hurricane. The expressions of Bai Qing and the others changed drastically. Without any hesitation, they hurriedly retreated from the Bai family's territory. Many of the Bai family's members had already been secretly sent away when the Green Lotus Mansion wanted to deal with the Bai family. Therefore, they had nothing to worry about. The green dragon bead was extremely fast. In an instant, it had arrived in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with a grave expression. He pointed his finger and 10 yellow spring death needles shot out one after another, pressing against the green bead. Bang! 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 Unfortunately, the moment the yellow spring death needles landed on the green bead, there were continuous sounds of explosions, and they all exploded, turning into countless yellow spring water droplets. After breaking through the 10 yellow spring death needles, the green dragon pearl's target was very clear, and it was heading straight for Zhuowen. Celestial technique Lone Peak. Zhuowen snorted coldly, and with a bend of his right hand, celestial core power surged from his body. Then a huge lone peak fell from the sky, bringing with it countless whistling sounds. It carried with it a supreme power, and it rumbled on the green dragon pearl. Ding! A crisp sound suddenly rang out, and the lone peak pressed down, causing the green dragon pearl to stop. However, this was only temporary. The green dragon pearl was like an unyielding warrior, and countless green lightning bolts surged out, overturning the lone peak that was pressing down. Zhuowen's expression did not change. With a wave of his sleeve, he took out 5,000 celestial crystals and crushed them. The celestial core power surged out of the celestial crystals, and it immediately converged into the lone peak. The lone peak, which was originally 1,000 feet tall, suddenly grew to a height of 5,000 feet, and its power and size had reached the extreme. Celestial crystals? This kid actually crushed 5,000 celestial crystals to increase the power of the celestial technique? Isn't this too extravagant? Shui Hui's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen a ghost, and he stared at Zhuowen. After seeing the 5,000 celestial crystals being crushed, he felt a trace of pain in his heart. After all, the Green Lotus Mansion's reserve of celestial crystals was close to 10,000, and he only dared to use them when he was cultivating. He was not willing to use them at ordinary times, let alone in a battle, so extravagantly increasing the power of the celestial technique. To be able to take out 5,000 celestial crystals and use it so casually, this kid is really not simple. I'm afraid he must have a lot of celestial crystals on him. At this moment, a trace of greed gradually rose in Shui Hui's eyes. Celestial crystals were extremely important to Celestial Saint Realm cultivators. Currently, there was no celestial qi in the central region. Only origin qi was left. The quality of origin qi was far lower than celestial qi, so it was basically impossible to extract celestial core power from origin qi. Therefore, all cultivators who had reached the Celestial Saint Realm basically used celestial crystals for cultivation. After all, celestial crystals had ready-made celestial core power for absorption. However, celestial crystals were extremely rare, and they were generally circulated among Celestial Saint Realm cultivators. Therefore, many cultivators below the Celestial Saint Realm did not know about the existence of celestial crystals. Only the important disciples of the major forces had the chance to come into contact with celestial crystals in advance. Rumble. At this moment, when the lone peak expanded to 5,000 feet, it directly suppressed the azure dragon bead and smashed it into the ground. Whoosh! Zhuowen took a step forward and swept to the top of the lone peak. His gaze moved up and fell on Shui Hui, who was floating in the air, and said indifferently, "Although I'm only a half-immortal, I'm going to defeat an immortal with my strength today. You will become my stepping stone." Shui Hui narrowed his eyes and sneered, "Stepping stone? You're not qualified." After saying that, Shui Hui pointed his right hand to the sky again. The azure lightning in the clouds became even more intense. Then the azure dragon that spat out the azure dragon bead directly broke away from the shackles of the clouds and swooped down. An earth-shattering dragon roar resounded in the sky. Zhuowen was not afraid. He dragged his right hand and lifted the 5,000 feet tall lone peak, and smashed it directly. Bang! The azure dragon and the lone peak collided, and a huge airflow swept up and surged. The dark clouds in the sky directly dispersed. The void, which was tens of thousands of feet wide, was affected by the impact of the collision, and shattered into transparent fragments. Fight! Zhuowen's fighting spirit was soaring. He lifted the lone peak and smashed it at the azure dragon again and again. Shui Hui was not to be outdone. He stood on the azure dragon and constantly formed seals with his hands, directing the azure dragon to attack again and again. Rumble! Rumble! The battle between the two shook the 9 heavens. It was not only Tianluan City, but also some cities near Tianluan City noticed the terrifying battle in the 9 heavens. The more Shuhui fought, the more surprised he became. Zhuowen was really terrifying. The more he fought, the braver he became. The celestial core power in his body seemed to be endless. Bai Qing and the others looked up at the sky and stared at the terrifying battle in the 9 heavens. They were all shocked. They knew that this was a real battle between earthly immortals. Of course, what shocked them even more was Zhuowen. He was clearly only a half immortal, but he was actually able to fight against an earth immortal. Especially the Lone Peak immortal technique he used. It was so fierce. This immortal technique was definitely not an ordinary one. You and I are equally matched. Continuing to fight is a waste of celestial core power. If you return the 5 animal seal to me, I won't interfere in the Bai family's affairs. Shuihui's face finally changed, especially when he felt the rapid consumption of celestial core power in his body. His face became extremely gloomy. After all, it was difficult for an earthly immortal to replenish his celestial core power from the surrounding pneuma. He had to use celestial crystals to replenish his own celestial core power. If there was no big deal, Shuihui rarely risked his life. It was even more impossible for him to fight with a warrior who was on par with him because of the small Bai family. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.